Welcome, everyone. This is Danny Dhaiphong. You're tuning into another live stream. We're going to be talking about a lot of developments today, some breaking developments such as Russia striking Kiev today, a strategic command center in retaliation to the use of ATACMS and long-range weapons. We're going to get into this as well as the numerous bombshells that Vladimir Putin dropped during his mega question and answer session, and so much more with two great guests today. The first is Pepe Escobar. He is a geopolitical analyst and a journalist, a rock star of geopolitics. You can find his Telegram in the video description below. But without further ado, Pepe, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Greetings, Danny. Greetings, all of you from NATO Stan. I'm still in Paris. And wow, we could go on forever talking about NATO Stan, but let's talk about more interesting stuff.
Sure. Well, Pepe, before we get started, I'm just going to tell everyone to hit the like button in order to boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. As I said before, you can find Pepe's Telegram in the video description below, and you can find all the places to support this channel there as well. Pepe, we are heading into 2025.
Yeah.
And Russia has just hit a strategic command center in Kiev in reported retaliation to the use of long-range ATACMS missiles into Russian territory. Now, this comes after Vladimir Putin gave his mega presser with the media, hours upon hours of talk. Talk about the significance of this, because there's been a lot of talk from U.S. intel about Russia using the Oreshnik again. And Russia's defense ministry said that they have used long-range precision weapons, but haven't been too clear about what kind. Talk about this in lieu of your reporting on what Vladimir Putin has told the media in this huge presser.
Well, Putin's direct line is always an extraordinary show. And for the past few weeks, it's combined. You have the direct line combined with a press conference. For the direct line, it's amazing. This year, he received over 2 million questions, mostly from Russia, of course, but from all over the world as well. So it was an absolutely outstanding show. 4.5 hours. He spoke virtually non-stop, answering all sorts of questions, domestic, foreign policy, for even personal questions, for 4.5 hours, and some questions from the media who were there as well. It was quite interesting because I sent my question via email. And in fact, he answered it indirectly in the middle of one of his answers. My question was very simple. Did Russia suffer a strategic defeat in Syria? And basically Putin said, no, Russia has not been weakened by what happened in Syria. Of course, there are lots of nuances in his response, and the whole way he treated the Syrian episode and the connections with Turkey, Israel, and of course, how we came to the situation since Russia intervened in Syria in 2015. It was quite intriguing. Some of the answers on foreign policy, they were fascinating, but what they did not reveal, especially, and for what was implied. For instance, he was extremely diplomatic dealing with Turkey. Instead of basically getting into the heart of the whole matter, which is Erdogan's obsession with his neo-Ottomanist policies. In fact, in the column that I just wrote before I start talking to you and to our audience, it's with Sputnik, probably is going to come out later today or tonight in Russia. One of my intertitles is Erdogan is thinking about 1919, which is not as far-fetched as many people would think. He's actually thinking about what happened to the Ottoman Empire after the end of the First World War, all the promises that were there, and the lands that he considered that they are part of Turkey, which in his own words, earlier this week, Turkey, Greater Turkey is much bigger than Turkey itself. This is what he said. And obviously, everybody interpreted as, yes, he's going to annex Syrian territory, which he is already doing. But in his mind, Danny, it's fascinating. Thessaloniki, Cyprus, Aleppo, and even Mosul are included in this Greater Turkey, according to his 1919 interpretation. So Putin was extremely diplomatic. He didn't get into it. He said, they have problems with the Kurds, but now this can be solved because they are policing their southern borders. I just hope there's not going to be any further problems about all that. There will be. And Putin knows better than anyone, but he didn't get into it. At the same time, what he said about Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the new authorities in Syria was extremely revealing. He actually said that, yes, we are talking. And it's not back channels, it's direct channels. We're going to try to find positions in common. And this brings us to a very, very thorny question. This means that Russia is now talking with Salafi jihadi terrorists directly. And this is not exactly a Russia's official position vis-a-vis terrorism, especially until a few days ago when Russia was fighting Salafi jihadi terror in Syria and elsewhere. So this proves that in terms of realpolitik, that's how it works, especially when you have a big power involved. Okay, the whole situation has changed. Irrespective of the deals, and we can say there is a lot of secret deals that were made among the three of the Astana process, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. Until the last minute at that round table Saturday in Doha, before the fall of Damascus on Sunday, and the deals struck between Turkey and Israel and Russia and Israel. So obviously Putin was extremely circumspect, talking about this, basically a big power gameplay. But what he said about Israel, he went up a notch. So this was also quite significant. If he was insisting on a dialogue with the new authorities in Syria, his own words, in terms of Russia's strategic priority, also his own definition, keeping the bases in Hmynin and Tartus. These are the Russian priorities. So they have to talk with the new authorities in Syria, which are not the real authorities. The authority is Turkey. So he was implying that he's talking to Erdogan. And they are talking all the time. Back channels, phone calls that are not leaked, etc. Israel, he said at least three things that are quite significant. That Israel is the main beneficiary of what's happening in Syria. And you can read that in terms of the big picture. That he's not exactly sure what are Israel's long-term objectives in Gaza, which led him to condemning what's happening in Gaza, the genocide, without mentioning the word genocide, the term genocide. And he also condemned the annexation of land, stealing, annexation, invasion, annexation of Syria land by Israel. So this went up a notch. And obviously this will be, considering how powerful is the Zionist lobby in Moscow, there will be repercussions about that. At the same time, which is also very, very interesting, and this comes from our Moscow connections, there was a fateful, long phone call, Putin and Netanyahu. And guess what happened immediately afterwards? Israel start bombing every warehouse in the book and off the book containing Soviet and Russian weapons all across Syria. The big question, Danny, who gave these coordinates? And then we enter mega fog of war mystery. Nobody knows. I'm sure you have seen that a lot of people are blaming Assad for that. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Assad did, especially Assad giving coordinates to Israel. Forget it. So this came, we can say, with a certain degree of certainty from sources in Russia. If they are from the Minister of Defense, affiliated with the Minister of Defense, if they are from intel agencies, factions inside the intel agencies, nobody knows. And if anybody says that they know, they're lying. So just this short introduction gives you and our audience a little bit of how extremely murky the situation is, and how, in many aspects, Putin's answers were evasive. They were very, very cleverly articulated. They left everything up in the air, except for this straight condemnation of Israel. Everything in terms of Turkey and Russia was up in the air. And of course, the fact that they are talking directly with Jolani and obviously with Erdogan about the future of Tartus and Hmeimim. So let's say this is our introduction to how complex the whole situation is. And we're not even talking about what he said about Ukraine.
Well, before we get to that, I wanted to ask you what you make of the reports about Russia possibly leaving Syria as we speak and moving their military assets to Libya. Is there any truth to this? Because
yes,
because I've heard different things, so I'm curious about your assessment.
Fog of war again, Danny. They are moving assets to Libya, no question. They may move some of these assets back to Russia, no question. And of course, we still don't know what's going to happen to Hmeimim and Tartus, because this ultimately, this is a direct negotiation between Erdogan and Putin. Considering that they are on very good speaking terms, no matter what happened before. And that comes back to all this fog of war about what kind of pre-fall of Damascus deal was struck between specifically Ankara and Moscow. Nobody knows for sure the terms of this deal. Obviously, there is a deal. There are two very good reasons already for it. Nothing happened with the Russian embassy in Damascus, number one, which is being protected, by the way, by HTS. That's quite something. Protecting from, obviously, more exalted Salafi jihadis, which may have other ideas, right? And the bases are still there. And the planes are coming and going. Transport planes are coming and going. And when it comes to transportation of Russian assets, many of these flights are overflying Turkish airspace. So this is a direct, a combination between at the highest level. All right. But we don't know the terms, and we'll probably will never know in, I would say, short to medium term. Same thing with Israel. We still don't know exactly what were the terms, even though Putin strongly condemned what Israel is doing in southern Syria. But what he did not say, which I thought was particularly interesting as well, was Iran and Russia, which would be inbuilt in that question of if Iran was weakened by what happened in Syria, if Russia was weakened by what happened in Syria, Iran was also weakened by what happened in Syria. He didn't answer anything about that, and nobody asked him about this, unfortunately, among the media that was there. And obviously, once again, we had a stupid question from NBC. That guy is beyond stupid. Everybody knows him in Moscow. And Rosenberg from the BBC, which is another asshole. the usual stupid questions. So, and this was an extremely important question, Iran-Russia, especially because next month, 5 days after Trump comes to power, they're going to sign the strategic partnership, Russia and Iran, and in Moscow, with Pezeshkian and Putin signing the agreement. So this is extremely important. It's still up in the air. What the thing about the pre-deals before the fall of Damascus makes sense because there's no antagonism, especially because there's no manifest antagonism between Erdogan and Putin so far. But everything else, Danny, is fog of war territory.
Well, let's return to West Asia in a minute. I wanted to, however, ask you about what you thought about Vladimir Putin's comments regarding the Oreshnik, because during this Direct Line media, he challenged NATO directly around the capabilities of the Oreshnik versus their air defense systems. This is what he had to say.
That was beautiful.
There is no chance to shoot down these Oreshnik missiles. Well, if those Western experts you mentioned think so, that Oreshnik can be shot down, we suggest they and those in the West and the United States, who pay them for their analysis, conduct some kind of technological experiment, a high-tech duel of the 21st century. Let them name some object, let's say in Kiev, concentrate all their air defense and missile defense forces there, and we will hit it with Oreshnik and see what happens.
So that's what Vladimir Putin had to say. And
I loved it. You know what I saw, Danny, when he said that? I had the good, the bad, and the ugly in my head with the final shootout with Clint Eastwood. And he rewrote it for the 21st century as a high-tech duel. That was brilliant. That was brilliant. I'm sure he thought about this trolling before. He didn't come up with that at the spur of the moment. Obviously, he thought about it before. And the way he delivered in a deadpan manner was even better. It was perfect. Knowing, first of all, that this is never going to happen, number one. And number two, if it ever happened, the humiliation of all these NATO-stunned idiots would be larger than the actual current humiliation they are suffering in the black soil of Novorossiya. So he felt free to spell it out. And obviously, this proves that, first of all, the West will never understand what Oreshnik is all about. One of the good explanations about Oreshnik lately has been Dmitry Orlov's explanation, which is physics and mathematics, essentially. And obviously, all these guys who run policy from Washington to Brussels, they are less than zero in both physics and mathematics. So they will never understand the Oreshnik principle. Not to mention that the Russians are working on other systems similar to Oreshnik or even more hardcore than Oreshnik. So let's say this was a little bit of, I wouldn't say comic relief, but, considering some of the questions and the answers were so heavy, this was playful Putin in action.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Pepe, because Russia did just conduct what they call a long-range precision strike on Kiev, and I'm curious, did they use the Oreshnik here or not?
Apparently not. No, apparently not. As far as we know so far, no. It was some sort of ICBM. We still don't know what. And, little problem. They could have hit this design center and the SBU command center. Come on, over a year ago, 2 years ago. Why now? Why wait so long? And this is not me saying it. This is what you hear in Moscow, in many circles, especially circles close to the Siloviki. The intel agencies, the people who are in favor of going for the head of the snake for a long time, and they think that Putin is too moderate, and he is. But there is a serious backlash. And after the killing of General Kirillov, that continues. He had no protection, Danny. Can you imagine that he leaves his house in the morning? There's not even a guard in front of his apartment. It's absurd. It's totally absurd. Just as before they killed Daria Dugina, Dugin had no protection at all. He has protection now, but that's after the fact. It's ridiculous. Kirillov, which is one of the most important actors in the whole unmasking of everything that the Pentagon has been doing in terms of biolabs, not only in Ukraine, but everywhere. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So there are serious problems in Russia in terms of lax security procedures. And a lot of people who don't need protection, they actually enjoy it. So that's serious. And when you touch this subject in Moscow, this is very, very touchy. You know, it depends on how you frame it, especially if you're a foreigner. You have to be very careful. But you know, this backlash against so, you know, too many velvet gloves dealing with everything coming from those literally neo-Nazis in Kiev, you know. But it's complicated because it involves the Ministry of Defense, layers at the Ministry of Defense, different layers in the intel agencies, the discussions between Putin and the Security Council, what other people in the Security Council do to influence Putin's policies. It's very, very, very complex, you know. So for outsiders to say blah, 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 it's basically blah, blah, blah. They don't know shit, in fact. And when we are there in Moscow and we see, for instance, inside ministries, the serious fiefdoms inside ministries, we see how complex the problem is. And when it comes to the Ministry of Defense, it's even more complicated because the Ministry of Defense is like a fortress. And it's impregnable for practically everyone, except insiders in the Ministry of Defense.
Yeah. What do you believe Russia's response to this will be then? Because it appears that we've had reports from U.S. intel saying that Russia will use the Oreshnik again. And then we just had Igor Kirillov be assassinated on Russian soil in Moscow. What do you believe the response will be to this? Because it appears that as we go into January 20th, 2025, the changing administration in the United States, it seems like the United States and NATO are upping the ante in terms of escalating this conflict.
Well, NATO keep escalating. The only thing that NATO does is to escalate. We know that. And this window is very, very, we have this window of 1 month, roughly. This is probably the most dangerous months that, you know, in recent history. Really, anything could happen. False flag. This thing could derail in a flash. We know it. First of all, because they're desperate. When I say they, is the exiting crash test dummy administration. And they only have 1 month to produce some facts on the ground that could alter, I would say, the flow of history, which shows an absolutely humiliating defeat, strategic defeat of NATO across the spectrum in Novorossiya. You cannot alter this fact, and this fact is practically inevitable. It's ahead of us, could be in the next few months, could be before the end of 2025 maximum, but it's inevitable. And there's nothing they can do to alter this fact apart from a direct intervention, which we all know what it means. And they're cowards, essentially. They won't do it. They're cowards. The only thing that they do is provocation. The strategy of the empire, and our friend Michael Hudson was one of the best interpreters, still is chaos, is anarchy. I used this in my last column before the one that I wrote today. And I quoted Michael. The American project essentially is anarchy. And now they installed total anarchy in West Asia. Nobody knows what will come out of having a crypto emir of Damascus controlled by Turkish intel and military intel sitting in thesis as the new emir of Syria. And all these repercussions are everywhere with all the players. So that's perfect in terms of an anarchic scenario. In Ukraine, the only thing that they can do, that the cornered empire can do, is provoke more chaos and more anarchy. But they are dealing directly with a nuclear superpower and hypersonic superpower. It's a completely different story. Syria was a practically non-government at the end. And the way the Syrian Arab army dissolved was, so many factors led to it. We cannot blame the soldiers of the Syrian Arab army. The country had been starved, literally, practically to death for almost 14 years. So it was a tsunami of sanctions, a state of siege, leading to starvation, almost mass starvation, an army that was not equipped, an army that said, okay, we did everything after that deal that they struck in 2020, and Salafi jihadis were more or less in that cage in greater Idlibistan. They said, this thing is over. No, of course not. And of course, the Iranians and the Russians do that. And when they start warning Assad, look, this thing is going to explode this past few months, so we went through it, since June by Ayatollah Khamenei, Russians, Iranians, everything, So it was inevitable that this was happening in Syria. In Ukraine, it's a completely different story. The Russians are controlling everything. The Russians control the battlefield. The Russians control up to where they're going to take the battlefield. The Russians control when we decide to end the story. And once again, Putin, during the Q&A, he was so diplomatic when he talked about the possible end of the war in Ukraine. He outlined the basic contours, but in a very soft way. He basically came back to Istanbul in 2022. Istanbul does not apply anymore because the conditions in the battlefield are completely different. You cannot go back to what they practically clinched in Istanbul at the time. No. And obviously when NATO is a side play. When the American generals and the Pentagon, they look at the state of the battlefield and what Russia could say, look, these are our conditions, they freak out completely. Because then it's total humiliating defeat and they cannot escape it. But Putin still said, okay, we come back to, what was agreed in Istanbul and all that. We need a legitimate government in Kiev, which they know it's not going to happen. Putin actually said, if Zelensky calls for elections and becomes a legitimate leader of Ukraine, we'll discuss with him. Putin knows that, first, Zelensky is not going to call elections. Second, he is already illegitimate. And third, he will lose the elections if he calls them. So, it's a vicious circle. Who they're going to discuss with about the future. And of course, Putin also said, we only sign deals if there is a legitimate leader in Ukraine. Once again, very important. It's not a legitimate leader in Ukraine that is going to decide anything and sign anything. Putin knows more than anybody that it's the American president. And coming back to Lavrov has been talking about this for months, over a year, in fact. The US is a non-agreement capable superpower. So basically, there are several ways to interpret why Putin was so accommodating when talking about a possible resolution for Ukraine. Okay, this was let's say, an exercise in public relations, the Q&A. So he couldn't get too deep into it. So he left, once again, everything up in the air, right? And being very accommodating. But we know, by what he's been saying for the past few months, by what Medvedev has been saying, by what is filtered through Peskov and all that, that the Russian conditions are those conditions spelled out since June, and they're very, very strict. And they know that the Americans will never accept any of that. But that's it. That's it. And that's not going to change, Danny and all of you. So, so the question becomes, after January 20, what is Trump's margin of maneuver, and what margin of maneuver the deep state will give him to negotiate? It's not him. He cannot negotiate anything. He can negotiate maybe an MMA fight with a Dagestan wrestler in Madison Square Garden, but he cannot solve the war in Ukraine.
Right. And Vladimir Putin was very clear, saying that Russia is in the driver's seat, that the military is taking square kilometers, entire square kilometers with each passing day in Ukraine. So the question remains then, given all of this, how do you see Russia playing out the rest of this conflict moving into the Trump administration? Because right now, what it seems Vladimir Putin is saying is that it's all full steam ahead.
Yes.
And you have this dynamic, too, of Vladimir Putin talking, as you said, more moderately, Dmitry Medvedev talking more, maybe radically, we could say, in terms of responses to these red lines being crossed. Where do you see all of this falling? Somewhere in the middle, or are we going to see more of the same coming up?
I'll answer your question, Danny, next month. I'll be back in Russia by the end of January. And this is one of my key questions everywhere, apart from the not exactly answered question about strategic defeat in Syria. Well, in 1 month, the situation, a month and a half, the situation in Syria is going to evolve very, very fast. But on Ukraine, we're going to have a pretty good idea of where things are going after a few days of the Trump administration in place. So, I would say late January until mid-February, we're going to have a pretty good idea where this is going. There will probably be a phone call, right? At least one phone call, direct phone call. Maybe they'll set up a meeting. So, so far, I would say for all of us, we have to be on red alert on what might go horribly wrong during the next 4 weeks.
Which could be? I mean, what could we be expecting in the next 4 weeks? Because I definitely understand the sentiment given what we have seen thus far, the increasing escalation, strikes on Russian territory, assassinations of major military figures in Russia. What could be next?
A provocation in Moscow, much bigger than killing General Kirillov. I would say that this is the number one possibility, because the SBU can do that with their NATO advisors. They can easily do it. And then all bets are off. Because you cannot say, we're going to respond, this is a red line. No. Then all bets are really off. So we have reason to be extremely worried, all of us. Mm-hmm. And these people are out of control, Danny, we know. And the exiting bunch before January 20, they are mega losers. They lost everything. They lost all their bets, except, of course, Syria. But Syria is a long story, because Syria is bipartisan. It's different. Mm-hmm. Syria is the deep state. For the moment, the deep state won in Syria. We don't know for how long. But what started with Operation Timber Sycamore, all of you remember, I'm sure, which was basically do everything to destroy Assad. And then the Pentagon took over later on, and this preparation of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was basically directed by the Pentagon. Which, by the way, they have 2,000 troops in Syria, right, Danny? We didn't know that. They just revealed to us a few days ago. We have at least 2,000 troops in Syria, which means they probably have 10,000.
Yeah, well, that number was far lower,
Far lower.
in terms of public reporting.
Exactly.
When it comes to that, yeah.
So this tactical victory, of course, but when you look at this, since the beginning of the war, for 13 and something years, it would have to happen because Syria was practically totally destroyed. It had to happen. Starved to death, everything, the sanctions, corruption, and of course the last few weeks, Samsonites full of cash, you name it. It was inevitable. And coming back to Assad, I'm not sure he will talk in public after this first declaration. We didn't explain much. No? Maybe Russia wants to keep him in the background for a while, see where this is going, because don't forget, he could come back later, in a few years, for instance. Anything is possible. And considering that the Russians are always a few steps ahead, chess-wise, anything is possible. I am particularly intrigued by the Spetsnaz in person with some of their best operatives, snatching General Hussein al-Hassan and bring him to Moscow. And, as I wrote it today, it's not to put him in a comfortable dacha in front of the Lake Baikal. No. He's going to be talking business and long-term business. So this is far from over. It's just beginning. And of course, Russia has, in terms of discussing, especially with Turkey, what they want, probably the only leader that Erdogan really listens to in the world is Putin. He doesn't listen to anybody else. And the only one that he really respects. So the margin of maneuver is enormous, which comes back to all these pre-fall of Damascus secret deals, which we'll never know about, of course. But the interest, I would say that the really, really interesting link is what Erdogan and Putin more or less established. Next steps ahead.
Yeah. And I'm curious if you could talk a bit about that, given the writings that you have just published, which I can share with folks in the video description directly, as you're speaking. I wanted to ask you about, you've written a couple of articles, one for The Cradle, one for Strategic Culture, about this situation, and you did comment on Russia's role, how Russia's navigating this, but so much more, which I want to get into. So first, maybe talk about that, and then we can move on to some of the other points you made in the article.
Well, the key point is what we've been discussing from the beginning, what Erdogan and Putin decided behind closed doors. And this was personal, Danny. You remember Lavrov's body language at the table in Doha on Saturday when he was with Hakan Fidan from Turkey and Arakchi from Iran? Lavrov was pissed. I've never seen him like this, especially during this past year, for instance, because he knew that the deal was done and he was not fully aware of what this was all about. So this was not discussed at the level of foreign ministers, was high up. There's a fascinating photo, which is, it's a riot in Turkey. You have the three neo-Ottomans, one behind the other. You have Erdogan, close up. Right behind him, Hakan Fidan, which was the former head of MIT, Turkish Intel. And right behind Fidan is Kalin, which is the current head of MIT, Turkish Intel. So this is you see the neo-Ottoman triumvirate in one picture. In Russia, you could never have a photo like this. You would be only Putin. You would have what? Gerasimov as number two. No, Gerasimov doesn't make policy. So this was Putin and Erdogan directly. And like I told you, Danny will never know. This is really up there. I will try to get some more into it, and I'm going to Istanbul before I go to Moscow next month. So I hope some people in Istanbul can at least, especially dissidents, well-informed dissidents, can tell us a little bit extra from what they are gathering, not from the pro-AKP press and pro-Erdogan press, different, but from some, relatively independent players who have access to Ankara, to the palace in Ankara. And there are some, and they're outside the government, but they have their connections still. Usually diplomats, well-connected diplomats. So
Right.
it is in geopolitical terms, in terms of cliffhangers, it's what's going on is absolutely fascinating. And for all of us observers, it's total fog of war. We know what happened in Syria and how. We have no idea what could happen next.
Well, in our remaining time, I wanted to now pivot because in your pieces that you've been writing about Syria, you have gone into great lengths as to the state of the overall axis of resistance. And unlike others in our circles, perhaps we could say,
Yes.
who are very pessimistic about the situation going forward, you offer not just the obvious realism and realistic situation that there is the difficulties and challenges right now and ahead for the resistance for the multipolar world, but you also say not so fast about the axis of resistance being dead. We just saw Yemen strike Israel with 2 ballistic missiles. They obviously didn't get the memo that the axis of resistance is dead.
No,
but
I'm curious.
So I'm curious about if you could lay out how you are looking at this overall situation in the region and in the multipolar world as the fallout from Syria's collapse take shape.
Well, Danny, what's going on in Teran, once again, it's very, very complicated. There is a power struggle, no question. Let's I'm oversimplifying essentially, but let's say on one side, leader Ayatollah Khamenei and the IRGC leadership, and on the other side, the let's call them liberals, Pezeshkian as president, Zarif especially as vice president, and the high bourgeoisie of Teran, which is Atlanticist, essentially. So this is extremely serious. For us foreigners, it's practically impenetrable. So our friends, our connections, of course, they can they tell us a few things and what they know, but they know only part of the story. And of course, the fact that, for instance, there was a running accusation with no evidence, very, very important, that these very well connected, let's say, crypto-Atlanticist, neoliberal, haute bourgeoisie of Tehran circles, they betrayed Hezbollah. They gave coordinates directly to the Israelis to get rid of the Hezbollah leadership. once again, all of you, there is no evidence about it, but this is something that is openly discussed in Iran, and it went all over the place. It's a taboo discussion, but it's on. So we don't know how serious it is, this process of undermining the vision of Khamenei, the workings of the IRGC and the Quds force after Soleimani, the post-Raisi environment, the fact that Pezeshkian is, for all practical purposes, a very weak president, the fact that Zarif, right behind him, has a lot of power in terms of the Atlanticist connections, and how this is going to be resolved in the short to medium term. The resolution of this drama will condition how the axis of resistance is going to be rebuilt. As you said correctly, the Houthis didn't get the message, and they will never get the message, because they are the ones with the real cojones in this whole story, and they will continue. They were attacked by Israel. Israel destroyed a power plant in Sana. They don't care. They'll keep going. Hezbollah, they will take time to rejuvenate, rebuild, find a different supply line bypassing Syria. They can do it, but this is going to take time and a lot of effort. And of course, Iraq, because Iraq is also an extremely complex situation. The government, essentially, which I visited the government a few months ago when I was in Baghdad. We had an audience with the prime minister. And I talked a lot with some advisors to the prime minister. And they are, most of them, pro-West. We didn't talk much about Russia and China. They were talking about the US and Europe all the time. So you can see who's around the prime minister of Iraq. And of course, when we try to meet the people from Hasht al-Shabi, they didn't exactly help us. On the contrary, it's like if we were a small group of foreign visitors, but it was a bit hard for us to actually meet the Hasht al-Shabi people physically. And at one time we were in the same city, okay, outside, because it was during the pilgrimage, and we were in near Karbala, but separated by 10 kilometers or so. And these 10 kilometers in terms of a pilgrimage in Karbala will take 1 day for us to to cross everything to meet them. But the vision of the axis of resistance of the government in Baghdad is very different from the vision of Hasht al-Shabi, Kataib Hezbollah, and all the people mobilization units, which are part of the axis of resistance. So this is the Iraqi riddle, extremely complex as well. So it depends on what's going to happen in Iraq. It depends on what's going to happen in Iran. And then we can start talking about the rebuilding of the axis of resistance. And of course, this process with Hezbollah is going to take a long time. So for the moment, the axis of resistance is fragmented and highly fragmented. But this is going to last, let's say, a few months, not more than that. And we can have throughout, by the second semester of 2025, a completely different setup. You see? That's why I like you mentioned, I wrote not so fast. For the moment, there's no question. They had a series of huge blows, serious blows. But never underestimate, when you meet them in person, Danny, when you meet Hezbollah cadres, high level, when you meet people from the IRGC, when you meet people from Hasht al-Shabi, it takes years. In my case, for instance, it took many years. But then, finally, when you have in mind not only the geopolitical game, but also the people involved on a face-to-face level, then you start trusting them and you start to see how valuable and how strong they are. So never underestimate them, never. But let's say straightforward answer to your question, it all depends on this power play in Teran. This is the key issue. And it's kept under wraps. For us foreigners, it's, once again, it's practically impenetrable. Even if we go there, which I plan to go to Iran as soon as possible. But Khamenei, he never minces his words, and he's a very fine strategist, as you know. He said, basically, this is what he said, look, for the moments like that, it's very hard, but don't underestimate the axis of resistance. This is essentially what he's been saying. And obviously, he's better informed than anybody in Iran. No exception. So we should trust him.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this, Pepe, is that the situation, it seems right now, is that many people believe, just looking at this, including the United States, we hear what they're saying in these think tanks and, Blinken talking to the Council on Foreign Relations. The narrative is that the axis of resistance, all of the Iranian quote unquote proxies are basically muted now, and that it's almost full steam ahead for the agents of chaos, the empire. But Syria appears to be a potential, and you've talked about this in your articles, and maybe you can get into it, an agent of chaos now itself, where you have all of these various forces that will be vying for power, both the armed groups as well as the states, Israel, Turkey, US. They're all looking for their own piece of Syria. Now, how does this impact Iran, then, the axis of resistance? Because many people believe that, well, it's full throttle ahead toward Iran to do the same to Iran. Do you find that to be more possible now, or do you find that this quagmire in Syria may cause more problems than maybe we're being led to believe right now for the empire?
Well, it's wishful thinking mixed with an obsession that comes from the 90s, at least, no? If not from the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, but the obsession is there. The Holy Grail is regime change in Tehran. This will never change. We have these ups and downs. For instance, we can have an Iranian nuclear deal that we had almost 10 years ago, but that obviously didn't solve anything, on the contrary. And don't forget that under Trump was maximum pressure over Iran. So maximum pressure will return on Trump 2.0, obviously. And now with the Zionists emboldened by capturing Syria for them, among others. So basically Syria now, the partition of Syria is US, Israel, and Turkey, essentially. That's it. It's already ongoing. It's very savage. We still don't know the border lines. It's fluid, but these are the three main players. So obviously Tehran looks at that and say, oops, we have to reorganize. And that's what they will do. The obsession by the genocidals in Tel Aviv to have the US fight their war against Iran will be even increased now with and the Trump-Netanyahu relationship, of course. So from an Iranian point of view, they are very, of course, the Persians are always very realist. They are good negotiators. They think long-term. They are realist. They are calm and calculating. A lot of, okay, I prefer not to define them especially all across the net, are saying, it's a bunch of cowards. They're never going to respond to Israel, attacking Israel again. It's not how the Persians think. If you say that, you are an absolute idiot who's never been to Iran. So they're going to take that. They're going to bide their time. If they respond to the latest Israeli attack, it's going to be very measured, especially under a Trump administration, or they may choose not to do anything and respond asymmetrically, which is something that they are very, very good at, especially now that they are reorganizing the whole configuration of the axis of resistance without taking Syria into account. This is a very complex process. So at the moment, it's, okay, we retract, we reorganize, we restudy the whole chessboard, and then we're back later. And obviously conducting all that will be Khamenei. And facing resistance by his own government. So that's coming back to the key problem, with a weak president, but with some very, very powerful interests behind. And this high bourgeoisie in North Teran, especially, these people have a lot of power, a lot of connections, a lot of money. They are all over Europe and US. So it's a dangerous adversary. And obviously, for them, is regime change. It's like they were a bunch of Zionists in Washington. It's the same thing. They want regime change as well. So we have these as allies. The Washington gang and the North Teran gang. And obviously, Khamenei and the RGC, they look around, they say, wow, now we have a huge domestic problem. So we have to solve first our domestic problem, then we're going to start thinking about rebuilding the axis of resistance. Priorities, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a very astute analysis. And one of the final questions I had for you, Pepe, was about some of these dynamics that we're seeing that are very interesting given the collapse of Syria. One, you have, as you have mentioned in the past, Russia talking very forthrightly and openly with the so-called new government in Syria, made up of head-chopping terrorists, but doing so with what seems to be relative ease and not facing the kind of problems that we had assumed almost immediately they would face, which is maybe a forced ouster out of the country.
Yes.
And Iran, too, given Khamenei's comments, I guess my final question to you, he has also made known that Iran is in communication with the new regime, and there also hasn't been a lot of talk about, are these forces turning toward Iran? And there's also confidence that Iran will still be able to assist Hezbollah. What do you make of these kind of claims and these dynamics that you see?
It's not claims, Danny. It's part of the secret deals. Well, everything harks back to the pre-fall of Damascus secret deals. And none of us have access to that. And not even diplomats have access to that. And like I mentioned to you before, even Lavrov didn't know in practical terms. So this is really, really serious. It's really at the top of the pops, literally. I wonder on the Iranian side who was negotiating that. It was not Arakshi. No way. It was not Arakshi. It was probably somebody high up at the IRGC, directly connected to Khamenei, the Iranian negotiator in all these conversations. Pezeshkian is too weak for that. And Pezeshkian, he's lousy in foreign policy. He doesn't know anything about foreign policy, really. So that's what makes it so challenging, so intriguing, and at the same time, fraught with dangers. What's ahead? And of course, interfering with all that is Western wishful thinking. No? now that we got Syria, it's just a short hop to get Teran. This will never change. But look, they thought that they could inflict a strategic defeat to a hypersonic and nuclear power. Look where they are now. That's it. I rest my case.
Well, Pepe, it was great to be with you today to get you before the new year. So everyone, go to the video description. We have plenty of show left for you, but go to the video description, find Pepe's new articles as well as his Telegram. Pepe, thanks so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Danny. Thanks, all of you. This is our last conversation of the year, no? Right?
Yeah.
So
I'll be
have
in
a
touch
great
with you.
holiday season, everybody. And get ready, because when we're back in early January, wow.
It's going to be a bumpy ride. All right, Pepe.
Ride.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
All right, without further ado, we have our next guest, Scott Ritter. Scott, it's good to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yourself?
I am doing all right, Scott. We have a lot to get to, but I wanted to make sure everyone knew that your website was in the video description, and that's where everyone can find your work, support you if they can. Scott, where do we even begin? How about we begin with Vladimir Putin's direct line, his massive press conference. But in lieu of recent events, we saw that Russia has struck Kiev as of December 19th, Friday, I believe it was, in retaliation for the ATACMS that have been consistently striking Russian territory. And of course, there's also this question of Igor Kirillov, the top general of the nuclear, biological, and chemical division of Russia's defense ministry. How do you see these events, and how do you measure this retaliation, and where do you see things going from here?
Well, I mean, if you focus on retaliation, you get down into the weeds. You got to pull back and understand that we are in a transitional period in this conflict, one that has the potential of seeing this conflict brought to an end. Of course, it will end with a strategic Russian victory. And Russia has to, there's a lot of complexities here. How do you manage the battlefield and your victories on the battlefield, and the necessity to continue to keep the pressure on Ukraine, and in doing so, NATO and the United States, with the political dynamic. There's a lot of people out there who are just saying, Russia shouldn't compromise with anything, just press forward, full speed ahead, all that. You mentioned Putin's conference. While the Russian economy is not on the verge of collapse or anything close to that, Putin acknowledged that the sanctions do have an impact, and that Russia is making adjustments. There was no panic in his voice. It was just a matter-of-fact statement that the sanctions do have an impact. So it's in Russia's long-term interest to get their economy back on an even keel, and you can't do that while you're at war. And then Russia has the issue of how to work with China to counter this new America that's coming at them. The Trump administration is not going to be the Biden administration. It's not going to be about the pursuit of the rules-based international order that underpin the Biden administration's national security policy. Trump is this nebulous America first, peace through strength approach that could be beneficial to both Russia and China in terms of bringing about stability, but also could bring about conflict. And it has to be managed very carefully. And it's better to be managing that in an environment where the United States is not on one side of a conflict that has Russia on the other side. That's in Ukraine. So, there is a lot of pressure on Putin to bring an end to this conflict. And so everything he does has to be measured in that. I think, the Russians believe that it was necessary to retaliate for the ATACMS attacks and for the assassination of Lieutenant General Kirillov. But how you retaliate is also important. What signals are you sending? Remember, there's a lot of signaling being done between Putin and Trump that can't be done. And normally you'd expect them to pick up a phone call and have a conversation, but that's not happening. And it can't happen right now. Trump's not the president. He can't be negotiating, behind Joe Biden's back. So what happens is you end up, sending messages. I think Putin's entire presentation was one giant message. I think every time Trump gets on and does his press conference, it's messaging. Whether Tucker Carlson, this independent journalist who high profile, close to Trump, went over to Russia, had an interview with Lavrov the same year that he had an interview with Putin. Was that messaging? Could be. There's just a lot of signals being sent, and what you don't want to do is jam those signals by overreacting or doing something that changes the political calculus. And so, yes, I think that one of the targets struck was the SBU headquarters. It's a justifiable target, but it wasn't struck with 3 Oreshniks. So, Russia did what it needed to do, but it didn't over signal. It's a strange time because, as an outside analyst, it's very hard to know, what is important for the Russians. I mean, I can sit here and speculate, but what is Russia's priority? The economy? Is it tying up geopolitical loose ends? Trump has said he's going to target China in an effort to draw China away from Russia. What is Russia feeling vulnerable on that? What measures are going to be taken to preserve the Chinese-Russian relationship? All of these are factors that are brought to the table when Trump and when Putin's holding his little inner circle meetings, and we're not privy to them, so we don't know what the priorities. But as Ray McGovern, whom you're very familiar with, has often said, it's imperative that we listen to what the Russians are saying. And so what I would advise everybody to do is go back and read the totality of Putin's conference. You don't get to pick and choose. That's not how Putin has worked over the course of 25 years as the leader of Russia. He says what he means, and there's meaning in every word. Even though that press conference is a hours long tour de force of impromptu speaking, there's nothing impromptu about what Putin is saying. He's prepared for every question. He knows these issues inside and out, and he's not going to sit there and say things that aren't backed by the intent of the Russian government. And so I'd go back and just pay very close attention to the totality of that speech, and in there you'll find a lot of significant hints about the direction Russia is going. And I think what I've described is pretty accurate.
What do you say to those, Scott? Because there are many who see Russia being violated in terms of red lines that have been articulated by Vladimir Putin and Russia as a whole, whether it's the attacks on their territory with the ATACMS, whether it's this assassination of Igor Kirillov. What do you say to those who say that it seems like Russia is looking to be the weaker party here, that they are not responding with enough force against these violations?
Russia's the weaker party? Who's the stronger party then? I'm just curious, because if you're going to say that Russia's the weaker party, who's the stronger party? Name one party out there that's stronger than Russia.
Here it would be, according to these critics, it would be the NATO side. It would be the United
NATO's
States.
stronger. A NATO that's in total dysfunction, collapsing as we speak, can't generate any meaningful force. Is NATO stronger? Wow. Okay. No, NATO's cowering in its own urine. Nobody's stronger than Russia on this issue, which is why Russia can afford to take, the little hits. I mean, Russia has drawn red lines. If you think Russia's the weaker party, then ask General Brown how many times he changed his underwear after the conversation with Gerasimov about the limits of attackers that Russia will tolerate. Ask the CIA analysts who had to sit there and to say, is Russia bluffing? And be compelled to sit down and tell congressmen in the White House, no, they're not bluffing. If you push them too far, there will be a nuclear war. Russia's not bluffing. Russia's not the weaker party. Russia's the smarter party. And the last time I checked on the battlefield, it was the Russian forces that were advancing significantly every day, inflicting horrific casualties on the Ukrainians, and not the opposite. It's the West responding to Russia politically. It's Russia that dominates the narrative about any potential negotiation. So this is just crap. This is a desperate act by desperate people to say, oh, look, we matter. You don't matter. You don't matter at all. The West doesn't matter. And that's just this. And this is one thing Trump needs to understand. He keeps putting these people out there that, like Keith Kellogg, who, say things that imply that Russia is somehow on its back feet. No, Russia's not on its back feet. Russia would like a politically acceptable end to this conflict, but Russia's not going to give away any of the things that it has won. I mean, I can guarantee you this: when this conflict ends, there will be at least 5 territories in their totality that will be part of Russia. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, including the right bank of Kherson, Crimea. This will all be Russia, and it'll be recognized by the West and Ukraine as Russia legally. There's not going to be any of this Baltics, where the Baltics are part of the Soviet Union, but the West says no, they're not. They're going to draw a little thing. No, Russia's not going to allow that to happen, or because then the conflict will continue, and then you'll see. And there's been hints to this by both Putin and Medvedev that there will be additional territories. I mean, this is the reality of the situation. The West literally has no leverage. Russia can go as far as they want to go, for as long as they want to go. Ukraine is collapsing. Ukraine will not survive this year. Their military, they're down to pulling 18-year-olds off the streets to come in and fill the gaps. The numbers that are coming out are recognized. Forget all this Keith Kellogg nonsense about, well, Ukraine's only suffered 150,000 dead, 1.1 million. Okay, it's Ukraine's rebuilt 4 armies, and now they're going to have to rebuild a 5th, and they run out of manpower. There's no men left. There's nobody left to fight. The Russians, meanwhile, haven't run out of manpower. Don't believe this human wave assault nonsense. Russia's not launching human wave assaults. The battles are bloody, but Russia dominates these battles. The only time the Ukraine has an advantage on the battlefield is when they flood the zone with drones. And that's a temporary advantage. Yeah, it's bad news for the Russians that are, on the receiving end, but it doesn't change the outcome of the battlefield. Eventually, Russian supremacy in air power and artillery and communications and the ability to jam people, etc., prevails. And this is why Russia's advancing every single day across the entire line of contact, because they are dominating the battlefield. So the West is pathetic right now. It's basically an information war. What cracks me up is the Russians aren't losing any sleep for any of the crap that appears in American media. It's only us Western analysts who get spun up in it. The Economist said this. Since when has the Economist said anything accurate about Russia? The Financial Times says this. And the New York Times leads with a headline. So none of it's accurate. It's all propaganda, and it's all designed to spin not Russia, but us. Why? Because they want us to continue to support the transfer of billions of dollars to Ukraine. But it's just, throwing good money after bad, doubling down on stupid. No, I don't see any panic in the eyes of any Russian official talking. Watch Secretary General Rutte next time he speaks. He's Mr. Twitch. Nothing but panic. Watch anybody who speaks about the conflict on the part of the West. Panicked, twitching, uncertain. Then watch the Russians speak. Steady, calm, because they know who's winning. and they don't care what we in the West think. The only reality that matters to them is the reality on the battlefield.
Well, let's actually listen to a short clip of Vladimir Putin to verify or validate or lack thereof, or the opposite. Scott, let's see. This is what Vladimir Putin had to say about that situation on the battlefield.
Our army is progressing. They're making advances, and the enemy cannot hold the positions. They withdrew. They organized some defenses, but they cannot hold those defenses because tomorrow there will be the next advance. So they cannot stop our army. And if we stop for a week, we will give them time to make those positions a stronghold. We'll give them time to get additional supplies and additional military equipment. And what is very important, they will be able to train additional personnel.
Scott, doesn't sound so much like someone who is on the weaker side or the panicked side. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's what I said. There's not going to be, the notion that there's going to be a ceasefire or freeze on the battlefield. He just said it's ludicrous. We're talking, when we speak about Ukraine, we're speaking about a military that's very large, very sophisticated, with very deadly weapons in the hands of men who, for the most part, prepared to die to defend a position. And it takes a lot to knock that kind of military off kilter. The Ukrainians especially in the Donbass region have had 14 years to dig in, and they had defenses in depth. And what's happened is Russia, through tremendous amount of sacrifice and perseverance, has broken through that defensive zone. And so now the Ukrainians are falling back on unprepared positions. And as a result, they can't last in the face of a concerted Russian assault. This is why the Russians maintain pressure on them the whole time. The Ukrainians can't dig in. And look what Putin said. We're not going to have a ceasefire. We're not going to let them dig in. We're not going to let them reestablish, a defensive fortification line that now halts us. And once you halt, that the Ukrainians can stiffen all along the line. Right now, as Ukrainians bring in forces, they're being ground up. They have to fall back. And the forces that come in aren't coming into a prepared position. They're coming into a very static position that Russia dominates, and they're killing them and continuing to push. The moment you hit pause, the glue gets to set. The Ukrainian forces get to come in, dig in, and they begin to gel. And the second the Russians resume, now it's going to cost them more to take that position. And while they're doing that, more Ukrainian forces are coming in. This is what has been defining this battle. It's a war of attrition, pouring in resources. But right now, the Ukrainians don't have resources, and those that they bring in are being ground up because of the fluid situation on the battlefield. Why would Putin yield this advantage? This is an advantage that the Russians have won over two plus years of hard fighting to break through those defenses. Russia has Ukraine exactly where you want. Total collapse on the battlefield. Just keep pushing. The Ukrainians have no choice but to die or withdraw. There's no defenses for them to fall in on. Those defenses are gone. So why would Russia ever give that up? Why would Russia say, yeah, what the hell, Christmas ceasefire? Because then you literally fall back to the position that you were, 6 months ago, which is a position you don't want to be in. You want to be exactly where you are right now. This is what you put all of your military effort into, achieving this result. And now the Ukrainians are in a general retreat on the battlefield, and there's no reversing this. You're not going to stop the Russian advance. Russia has significant forces in there that can continue to do the rotation, continue to put the pressure, and exploit situations as they develop. For instance, the need to break through and capture the totality of Kharkov, or perhaps even swing down and take Odessa, which is now two options on the table. Putin and Medvedev have hinted at this to the West. If you don't give us what we're looking for, we can change this. It won't just be the 5 territories that you'll be forced to give. It'll be maybe 2 more, 3 more, 4 more. We can go as long as you want. We can sustain this. Ukraine can, and it only gets worse for Ukraine going forward. This isn't, a bad moment that, Ukraine's going to be able to turn it around. Ukraine will never. Today's the best day for the Ukrainian army that's going to exist at this point, because tomorrow's going to get worse, and the next day is going to get worse, and it's only going to get worse. And you start to see the panic in the Ukrainians as they recognize they're going to have to accept a deal that they're going to have to give away territories, and give away territories on terms that aren't good for them, meaning permanently give away territories. And when I say give away, the Russians already have them, but permanently say these are no longer part of Ukraine. We no longer have any claim on them. And then the West will lift saying Russia's not going to play this game, make all these sacrifices, only to freeze into a situation that allows Ukraine to say down the road, well, we're going to launch a counterattack. These territories are really ours. We'll want NATO come to our assistance. No, Ukraine is defeated. And that's the reality. And the West is defeated. The West doesn't get a vote. They don't get to say, no, we're going to put Western troops patrolling a DMZ. There will be no DMZ. The war will be over. Ukraine will have lost. NATO will have lost. And that's just the reality. And Russia's not going to yield on that.
Talk about this number that Russia recently put out there, Russia's defense ministry, around Ukraine's losses since 2022. 1 million. They're saying 1 million Ukrainian troops killed. Do you find these numbers to be believable given the situation that has transpired in the conflict thus far?
Well, given that I was saying that in the fall of 2023 that the Ukrainian casualties were up to around 700,000. Yeah, I'd say they're believable. They might even be lowballing it some, because we just don't know. That Ukraine, this is a corrupt regime populated by generals that don't care about the men they lead. They view them as just throwaway resources, and they view their deaths as a way to make money. Ask all hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian widows out there, or they're really widows, but the government won't acknowledge their widow status. They won't acknowledge that these men have died. Why? To do that, you have to make that payout. Instead, they take the pay and it goes in the pockets of these corrupt generals. Every aspect of Ukraine is corrupt. Every aspect of this is a rotting, festering, ridiculous nation state. Now, people can say, well, that's Russia's fault for coming in. No, it was corrupt beforehand.
Yeah. I mean, the situation with regard to Ukraine is just is that despicable. And so I wanted to follow up on this, Scott. Vladimir Putin said in this direct line, in this massive presser, also he made comments about the Oreshnik. And now Russia hasn't used the Oreshnik again, contrary to U.S. intel reports. Perhaps by the time people watch this video, that will have changed. But as of right now, U.S. intel said it could happen within days, within weeks. It hasn't happened. But Vladimir Putin said, and he gave a direct challenge to NATO, saying, get out all your air defense systems, anything that you have, place them wherever you want, and then we will shoot the Oreshnik and see how you do. What kind of message is Vladimir Putin sending here? Is he bluffing, as many people have intimated, or is this a direct warning that the Oreshnik is in fact the real deal?
Well, the Oreshnik is a real deal. I mean, it exists. It was launched. There are more of them. Russia's put them into serial production. But I think people need to understand that the Oreshnik is a strategic system. It's not a tactical system. It's not a battlefield system. It is a strategic system that normally only comes into play when nations are locked in existential struggle for survival. Russia used it to send a signal that we are ready to take this to the strategic level if you continue these attacks on us. But it's not a weapon to be used lightly. You don't take the strategic rocket forces. That's what this is. This isn't, battlefield artillery. So this isn't army level artillery. This is a strategic rocket force that's linked to the same command structure as the ICBMs. So this isn't a weapon just to be thrown around lightly. But Russia is right now making sure the West understand, do not overstep your bet. We understand you're in a state of panic. We understand you're trying to come to grips with the fact that your multi-decade long adventure in Ukraine is ending. We understand that you've poured in hundreds of billions of dollars into a losing effort and you're politically collapsing in Europe. I mean, understand that while this is taking place, the German government has collapsed. The French government's on the verge of collapse. The British government, who the hell knows what's going on in England right now? The Canadian government's done. Europe is finished. I mean, it's literally in a state of free fall because of the stupidity of this policy. And so all of this taking place, while Europe is in a panic, and Russia understands that. But oftentimes when people are failing domestically, they look for external things to prop them up. And Russia's sending a signal, don't look to Ukraine because we have the Oreshnik and we will use it again if necessary. But I don't think Russia wants to use it. It's a strategic system. First of all, it's very expensive. I mean, I can't price it out, but I would imagine $12 to $20 million for a missile, maybe on the lower end. But this is a new missile that lower end when you get to serial production. But this was a new missile that it's still experimental, and so there are some limited production items out there. My understanding is that they drew upon things that were already in development. There's nothing new about the Oreshnik. It's just basically what's new about it is they took a piece here, a piece there, a piece there, a piece there. They brought it together and went, voila, we got a system. But some of the pieces they were taking are from the Cedar ICBM, which is a strategic follow-on to the YARS system, the YARS-M, which is the most modern modification of the YARS road mobile missile. These are systems that are in advanced stages of development, such as the YARS-M or the Cedar early on, where they've done some flight tests. My understanding is that the first stage of the Oreshnik is the first stage of the Cedar ICBM. The Cedar ICBM incorporates some of the most advanced technology when it comes to solid rocket, motor fuel. This engine is an engine that has variable speeds to prevent, boost phase intercept. So it's not just going to come in; it's going to change speed, change direction, and do all this fancy stuff to avoid having somebody on the ground being able to hit it. That stuff doesn't happen cheaply. It's an expensive system, especially when you're early on in the development stage where, this isn't a production line stuff. This is something that's literally handmade. Now they're using it. It's an expensive system. Russia's not going to sit there and just throw them away like they're firecrackers. They fired the one, made their point. I think they probably have maybe a half a dozen online right now, waiting for, those are the ones they could make using the pre-production materials. But now they've got to go to serial production. In Vodkinsk, you can crank out 6 of these a month, maybe. That's what they were doing with the SS-20s. Maybe you could shut down some other production lines and boost it, but they're still building the YARS, they're still building the Cedar. All of the Vodkinsk is the place that is where the bulk of Russia's solid rocket fuel missile production is taking place, and there's a lot of systems that are being produced. So even when you go to serial production, there's just a limited number of production halls available, and it's not just that, but the personnel. You have to have personnel that are trained to do this, which means as you go to serial production of a specific system, you have to take people from other projects or recruit new people or blend them in, because you're going to want old hands, but they have to be trained up on the specifics of this system. And so it doesn't happen overnight. It is a commitment of time and resources, and you're not going to do that just to throw it away willy-nilly. So I think Russia would prefer to get through this conflict without firing any more Oreshniks, but they're prepared to do so. And you can't have deterrence unless you're prepared to act. And by firing that first Oreshnik, Russia was trying to establish some sort of deterrent factor. It says, don't do this or we will respond with this. And so Russia has to be prepared to respond if that deterrence is going to have any value. But I personally believe that Russia would like to get through this Ukraine conflict without firing any more Russians, because it's a very, very dangerous thing. Because what's the next step to escalation after you? Once firing Russians becomes the norm, and the people that you're firing them against do not change their strategic trajectory, what's the next level of escalation? And then we get to nuclear weapons, and that's just a direction we don't want to go.
Well, Scott, I've been receiving messages. I've been hearing this. I've been seeing this be debated about the Oreshnik and after its use. This idea that, well, the use of Oreshnik appears to not have established deterrence because the ATACMS, the Storm Shadows, keep falling into Russia. What do you say to this in lieu of the fact that you're saying that Russia has, and overall, they need to use these strategically? What do you say to those who say, well, these missiles are still coming at Russia and deterrence has not been established?
Again, I don't know exactly what was said between Gerasimov and Brown back in November. Gerasimov is the chief of staff of the Russian Armed Forces, and General Brown is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But it's been alluded from several sources that Gerasimov put Brown on notice that if you fire ATACMS to a certain range, we're just going to beat the snot out of the Ukrainians. And they did. I mean, you remember the big attack took out the Ukrainian infrastructure, energy infrastructure. Not a single Oreshnik used. And they crushed Ukraine, crushed the air defenses. They said, okay, if you guys want to do that, send your ATACMS into a certain range level, we'll just continue to beat the snot out of Ukraine. That's okay. But if you go longer range, now we're getting into areas that we're not going to tolerate that. And it'll not only be Oreshnik, but it'll be nuclear as well. We're not going to let you strike deep into Russia. Again, just so people understand, because I always hear the people say, well, if Russia can bomb Ukraine, Ukraine certainly can respond back. Russia made it clear back in 2021 that one of the existential red lines for them was the deployment of NATO long-range strike capability into Ukraine. Why? Because Russia is, it inherited a strategic defense system from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, when it built the strategic defense system, had Ukraine incorporated into it, meaning that all the stuff that was supposed to be in the rear, away from immediate strike, tactical strike capacity of the West, all the radars, command and control centers, logistics facilities, all this stuff. Now with Ukraine, not part of the Soviet Union, the distances are much shorter. And so what Russia says, we're not going to let you come in and use Ukraine as a land base for these tactical systems so that you can start hitting our strategic capabilities with tactical military capability. That's not going to happen. They made that point. It's not going to happen. We will not tolerate it. When Biden talked to Putin in December, he gave assurances. Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. But when the State Department negotiators sat down with their Russian counterparts in early January, and the Russians said, just a reminder, no missiles in Ukraine. They went, we're not willing to talk. We can't give that one up. And that was a big signal to the Russians going, what the hell's going on? ATACMS may be a tactical system, but it has strategic capacity if it's fired at the full range to hit the targets that are of strategic importance to Russia. This is, this gives NATO and Ukraine the ability with tactical systems to achieve strategic result. And the Russians have said no. And Gerasimov made that point to Brown. He said, no, if you start attacking our strategic capabilities, then we will respond strategically. And that means not only Oreshnik, but it means nuclear armed Oreshnik kind of stuff. We're not playing this game. And so, there's an understanding that the ATACMS attacks can continue. And they are. But look what happened. Every time they fire the ATACMS, Ukraine just gets the snot knocked out of it. You think Russia's going to lose because a couple of ATACMS landed on an airfield? Because a couple of ATACMS took out a command? This is war. Russia's been waging war for 2.5 years. They've suffered casualties. They know how to take losses. This is, it's tragic for the people who are dying, but this is war. It happens all the time. Bad things happen in war, but that's tactical maybe operational, but it's not strategic. And so the people that are saying this again are who are they trying to impress? I mean, frankly speaking, you think anything we're saying here today between you and me is going to have the Kremlin going, oh my God, I didn't think
of that one. Yeah.
Holy, wow. Like, who are these people that are saying Russia's weak trying to impress? You think Putin wakes up in the morning and goes, damn, Scott Ritter on Danny Dhaiphong's show said that if they keep crossing a red line, Russia's defeated. Russia doesn't care about any of this conversation we're having right now. They don't. They have no, it doesn't move their needle at all. So this is a conversation that's taking place within the limited confines of Western analysts. This is about Western analysts trying to impress Western analysts. And so who are the people out there saying this? Now, the danger comes is that sometimes when these analysts say things, people like Keith Kellogg pick up on it, and then it becomes part of the policy. And then Russia has to respond to that. But again, Russia responds to that by ignoring it, just saying, I mean, again, what's Keith Kellogg going to do when armed with the stupidity that he's armed with? Is he going to be allowed to land in Moscow? I mean, why would the Russians, if that's it, if I were the Russians, I would say, nah, we don't want to talk to them about that. We have no desire to talk to them about that. We'd like to talk to Trump, and Trump's going to have to change his attitude before we bring him in. I do think that the Trump administration is going to have meaningful dialogue with the Russians, but not based upon any stupidity that Keith Kellogg's out there. Russians deal with reality. They don't deal with fiction. They don't deal with fantasy. And that's what all these red lines are, fiction and fantasy. When Russia needs to establish a red line, it puts it out there in no uncertain terms. And I'm fairly certain that's what the conversation between Gerasimov and Brown was. That doesn't mean now that the United States won't seek to fire an ATACMS long range, but if it does, the Russian response will be immediate and it will be significant.
Yeah, and perhaps before we move on, Scott, if you could just remind, because I think some of this is also completely misunderstanding, because I think we have a lot of people digesting. It's not, you mentioned the political class, like Trump officials, Trump appointed officials, maybe adopting what they're being told by think tanks, by Western analysts that go into the Western media and talk like this. But I think also it happens to people who watch this show, who want to understand better what actually is going on. Maybe you can remind folks about Russia's actual strategy here, how they are actually responding and moving toward this strategic victory over NATO, because I think sometimes people forget that red lines are, yes, red lines, but there is this bigger conflict, this bigger war being waged right now.
Well, first of all, we have to understand this is a war that was brought to Russia. Russia didn't start this war. There was an amazing admission by Tony Blinken. He said, for the last 20 years, we've been trying to remove the Syrian government. I mean, everybody knew that, but I'm here to tell you that since the end of the Cold War, or since the end of the Yeltsin era of the Cold War, the United States has had as its policy towards Russia the strategic defeat of Russia, seeking the dismember of Russia, the permanent disenfranchisement of Russia, the weakening of Russia. That's the goal and objective of the United States. Everything we've done is to achieve that result. And Ukraine has played a very important role in this. That's why in 2008, we moved forward to bring Ukraine into NATO, not because we love Ukraine and we think Ukraine's great, because we recognize what that does strategically to Russia. It weakens Russia and could bring about, the collapse of the Putin government. That's their goal, the collapse of the Russian economy and the collapse of Russian cohesion. So Russia could be broke apart. You can't forget any of this. This is why this is happening right now. This is why the United States backed the color revolutions in Ukraine in 2004, 2005. That was a CIA operation designed to inject Ukrainian nationalists in to remove the pro-Russian. Look at the cycle. They bring in Yushchenko. It was, Yanukovych again lost, and the goal was to inject Ukrainian nationalism, but there was pushback. You remember Yushchenko elevated Bandera to the hero of Ukraine. There was some pushback on that, and then he got voted out, and Yanukovych came back, and so they moved to remove Yanukovych again. But this time, they couldn't allow Yanukovych to recover. You see, you can remove him politically, but then you get into this cycle. And so what they had to do in 2014 is not only remove Yanukovych, but eliminate the Russian political element inside Ukraine. That's what this was all about, to weaponize Ukrainian nationalism, to suppress the Russian political component, the Ukrainian Russian, the Russian-speaking component of Ukraine, so that never again could Russia be represented in Kiev. It would only be Ukrainian nationalists. And this was done so that Ukraine becomes a weapon to dismantle Russia. And the Russians rightly picked up on this and said, that's not going to happen. We're not going to let you disenfranchise the Russian-speaking element of Ukraine. And that led to the seizure of Crimea and the beginning of a counter revolution in the Donbass to push back against the nationalists. 2014, 2015, the Russians had the Ukrainian army surrounded, was going to annihilate them, and that would have been the end of it. Poroshenko, in a panic, calls up Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande and says, help me, help me, help me. And they call up Putin and say, please, please, please don't kill all the Ukrainian soldiers. Let them go, and we want to have a negotiated settlement. That began Minsk I, led on to Minsk II. But the whole idea of Minsk was to stabilize the situation, to keep the Russian population politically viable in Kiev, to recognize their linguistic rights, their religion, their culture, all this kind of stuff that the nationalists were seeking to eradicate. And but it was supposed to be about peaceful coexistence. All of this is taking place, meanwhile, in the context of the West redefining its relationship with Russia. Gone is the partnership and peace. NATO and Russia start to divide, start to split apart. And so the West isn't looking for peace in Ukraine when you have this strategic imperative of defeating. But Putin's continued survival after 2007 was recognized by the West as an existential threat to their goals and objectives, because they were defining themselves as an entity capable of defeating Russia. In 2007, in the Munich Security Conference, Putin put them on notice that I see you. I see you. I see what you're doing. You're not going to get away with it. And then every speech afterwards, he basically said, we're not putting up with this. You want to get out of arms control treaties? There will be consequences. We will build weapons capabilities that will respond to that. All of this, is happening, all linked. Minsk was a fraud. We know that now. Poroshenko, Merkel, and Hollande all admit we never had any desire to have peace with Russia. Are you kidding? We were trying to strategically defeat Russia. That was our big picture. And now are you idiots? You believed us when we said we want peace in Ukraine? We needed Ukraine to destroy Russia. That's why we were trying to invite Ukraine into NATO. That's what this was all about, to bring Ukraine into NATO to destroy Russia. The Russians, when they met with when Putin met with Joe Biden in Geneva in 2021, I think June, one of the things he said is, look, if you want us to stop maneuvering our soldiers on the border with Ukraine, on Russian soil, by the way, so it's none of your damn business, but if you want that to stop, then you have to, you've got to, Minsk has to be brought in. We have to bring an end to this conflict. Minsk is the way. Everybody agrees. And Biden said, I will get Tony Blinken right on that. And Putin left with saying, okay. They waited all summer, not a damn thing. In the fall of 2021, Lavrov confronted his German and French counterparts and said, are you serious about Minsk? And they said, no, we're not ready to do it. So at that time, Russia pulled out and said, screw it. We're not playing this game anymore. Now what we're going to do, if you don't want Minsk, we have to come up with a new security framework. And that's why on December 17th of 2021, Russia provided draft treaties to both the United States and Europe saying, all right, since Minsk is no longer on the table because of you, not because of us, because of you, here's what we're offering. A negotiated, recognition of our respective, spheres of influence, to put in security framework so we avoid conflict. We're done with partnership and peace and all this crap. But we don't want to go to war. We just want to stabilize these things. You have to pull your military back to the 1997 lines. We're not going to recognize the expansion of NATO military capability beyond that because you guys lie. That's all you do is lie. And we're not going to let you get away with those lies. And they said, if you don't do this, then we have no choice but to bring on military technical means. And the response was, to be ignored by NATO and the United States to negotiate in bad faith. Russia initiates this special military operation, but it wasn't designed to defeat or occupy Ukraine. It was designed to get Ukraine to the negotiating table, for Ukraine to do that which the West wouldn't do. And it succeeded. 6 days after Russia crossed the line of departure, Ukraine is in Gomel, Belarus, beginning what was a series of negotiations to bring about an end to this conflict on terms that would be acceptable to Russia, to give Russia what it wanted. Basically, the Minsk thing to solve the problem of the Donbass, et cetera. Boris Johnson flies in and on instructions of the United States and terminates that agreement. And now we have this conflict. But this conflict now is about Russia doing militarily that which it said it wanted to achieve through negotiations. Russia is not seeking to strategically defeat the West. Russia is seeking to impose through military power a reality that it said should be agreed upon through negotiation. But this isn't about Russia using Ukraine as the beginning of a offensive into the West. That's all NATO crap. Russia's not going to attack anybody. Russia is simply going to resolve the issue in Ukraine. And then Russia will turn around. And people say, well, what's the diplomatic off-ramp? My advice to you would be go back and reread the texts of the December 17, 2021 draft treaties that Russia provided to both Ukraine and the United States, and you'll know exactly where Russia's coming from, because that's what this is all about. It's imposing that kind of strategic framework on Europe. But the interesting part is the Europe that existed in December 2021 doesn't exist anymore. NATO's weak, the European Union's collapsing. And so Europe may now look at this deal as actually the best deal possible. I mean, there's negotiation, things have to be negotiated and all that, but I think the Russians have on the table what is ultimately going to be the solution to this conflict. And that's the December 17th draft treaties.
Well, Scott, let's move to now West Asia, the Middle East, because, of course, that has been on everyone's mind over the last several weeks. I wanted to have you comment on what Vladimir Putin had to say at the presser about Syria. And I'm just going to play a brief clip, about 1 minute, just to get a sense of how he reacted to a question about Syria that Pepe Escobar says was actually his question, but was read out loud and addressed indirectly.
You mentioned Syria. Well, you and those who pay your salary would like to present everything that's happening in Syria as a shortcoming or a defeat of Russia. I'd like to assure you that is not so. And I'll tell you why. We have come to Syria 10 years ago. So in order to prevent the creation of a terroristic enclave, the likes of which we have seen in the other countries, for example, in Afghanistan, in general, we have achieved our goal. Even those groups that used to fight with the Assad regime, with the governmental forces, they have evolved as well. It is for a reason that today many European countries and the United States would like to establish relations with them. If they are a terrorist organization, how come you're trying to do that? Then that means that they have changed. That means that to a certain extent, our goal has been achieved.
Scott, your reaction?
I don't know. I think Putin, like everybody else right now, is trying to respond to a situation that wasn't predicted. I mean, he's absolutely correct. Russia intervened in 2015 in Syria to prevent the fall of the Assad regime, to prevent the black flag of Islam being raised over Damascus. Because if that had happened, the conflict in Syria, people tend to forget that they have to look at a map. How quickly radical Islam can gravitate from Syria into Iraq and up into the southern Caucasus, and then you have a situation where Russia's fighting the Chechen war all over again. Maybe in Ingushetia, and maybe in Dagestan, maybe in all above. And Russia just wasn't going to do that. This is of strategic importance to Russia. And this is, I think, one of the cases that Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian head of the Quds forces, made when he flew to Moscow in the summer of 2015 to say, you have to come in, you have to join us in this this endeavor to save Assad. Because prior to that, I mean, whatever the historical relations, the friendly relations between the Soviet Union and Syria was, Russia and Syria wasn't of strategic importance to Russia. Russia wasn't looking to project military power into the Mediterranean, reassert, its Soviet role of, countering the West. Logistically, it's impossible for Russia to do. I mean, you have a naval base, you have an air base, they can be destroyed in a heartbeat. I mean, it's not like, this is Fortress Russia, very vulnerable to Western intervention. But, you do that, then you bring in potential for Russian strategic response. But the point is, Russia wasn't going in there to invade Syria, to occupy Syria, and to project power into the region. Russia went in there with a very limited mission, and that was to preserve the Assad regime through military force, to defeat those entities that were threatening, and in doing so, to prevent this radical Islam from gravitating north. And this is an important point. It's to prevent radical Islam from gravitating north. The last thing I would think Russia would want to do is normalize the normalization of radical Islam. Because, basically then the counter can be, well, if it worked in Syria, why can't Islam move into Dagestan and create their own little Islamic republic? You say they're good in Syria. Why aren't they? I think this was a mistake by Putin. One of the rare mistakes that Putin makes. You don't want to normalize what just happened in Syria, because it does have the potential to bleed over into the southern Caucasus, and God forbid, further on into Bashkiria and Tatarstan and other Muslim areas. Russia has a very stable, normalized relationship between the Orthodox Christians of Russia and the Muslims of Russia, the various Muslims people. You don't want to upset this balance. It's one of the few success stories in the world between Christian-Muslim relations, and you don't want to upset this balance. And yet, you could look even in Chechnya. We're not that far removed from the bloody Chechen conflicts, the two Chechen wars, and there are still militant elements inside Chechnya and outside that view Ramzan Kadyrov's government as nothing more than a Russian puppet, and that Kadyrov, if he passes, this could lead to the potential for internal conflict again, which outside Islamic forces, historically have done that, could come in again. And now you've just created in Syria a place that says, yeah, you got a whole bunch of Chechens in Syria right now that have now been normalized. They haven't been. This is a mistake, a rare mistake by Vladimir Putin, I believe. This is because they don't understand. I think everybody was taken by surprise here. I mean, even the Russians who should have known. It's not going to happen, but I'd love to have the archives opened up and get the reporting of the various Russian commanders in Syria since 2017, reporting back to Moscow, defining the true state of the Syrian government and the Syrian army. While the Syrian army fought hard during this period of time, they only won because of Russian air power and Iranian proxy stiffeners, Hezbollah and others. This is why Russia was talking about the need for reform, top to bottom reform, because there's a problem in Syria. There's a systemic problem. But Assad pushed back, didn't want to do it. The Iranians also pushed to come in and do reforms or to take the lead in several areas. And Assad pushed back, didn't want to do that. Why? Why would you push back against the two entities that saved you? Because literally without Russian or Iranian intervention, Assad was a dead man. The black flag of Islam would have swept in and he'd be dead, his family be dead. That's just the reality of it. And then you'd have an Islamic state that the United States then would have to deal with violently and, get into more wars and all that. But why did Assad push back? And this is one of the big unknowns. We know that he was openly courting the Arab League to be brought back into the fold, and that the Arab League, which is principally Sunni Arabs, said, we can't let you in if you got this wonderful thing going on with the Iranians, and so maybe that's what pushed back. The same thing with Russia. The Arab League's like, yeah, but the Russians, America's not happy about this. So it seems like Bashar al-Assad was, playing two sides off against another. He needed the Russians, the Iranians to stay in power. He wasn't doing anything necessary to replace them with a viable standalone institution because he couldn't. He inherited an inherently corrupt regime in 2000, and he never had a chance to reform it. I do believe he intended to. He began something in 2005, but in 2006, there's a drought that comes in. For the next couple of years, they're trying to respond to the fact that the agriculture of Syria is collapsing and the rural farmers are fleeing to the cities asking for help from a government that's ill-prepared to help them, creating a whole bunch of discontent amongst the Syrian population to Assad and say, we blame you. Well, his defense was, I just inherited this thing. I haven't had a chance to fix it yet. But the problem is the government. He's the president. He takes the hit. And no sooner than they begin to stabilize that with a lot of Saudi money, and with Saudi money comes Salafist, infiltration. And so you already have people returning to the villages who are now looking at the government saying, Assad's bad, Assad's bad, Assad's bad. And then the Arab Spring comes in, and people around the world try to weaponize this. Remember, 20 years the United States have been trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. 20 years. Do the math. 2004. So that means in 2011, when this uprising, who's doing this. I don't want to hear from another Syrian that this was a spontaneous uprising by the Syrian population who is unhappy with Assad. There may have been elements of that, but the violence that came in was 100% outside driven, whether it's Saudi, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, United States, Turkey, whatever. It was outside driven. This was an American-led effort to remove Assad from power, starting in 2004, but really being weaponized in 2011. CIA backed and all this. No offense to Propaganda and Company, people who interviewed me recently, but the notion that everybody needs help. America needed French help to free themselves from the British. If you're equating the French to the frickin' CIA, there's something wrong with you. All right. The CIA is a corrupt entity that only exists to destroy things. They're not seeking to build things. The French were helping the United States build a new nation to take on the British.
Totally different. Totally different.
So it's completely different. It's a bad analogy. But my point is, that's what was going on here. The Russians and the Iranians came in to save Syria, not only from these Islamic elements, but the United States backed up. Jake Sullivan, of all people, has talked about Al-Qaeda being good in the context of getting rid of Assad. We'd rather that happen. We armed them, we equipped them, we did all this. And the Russians saw that. And remember, the Russians have an experience that many in the West aren't familiar with, and that's the Second Chechen War. The Second Chechen War had the CIA actively arming and equipping outside Wahhabist or Salafist elements to infiltrate into Chechnya and to make this into a broader conflict than just a Chechen. A lot of foreigners involved, a lot of foreign money, a lot of foreign fighters, and foreign religion. The Chechen religion is primarily Sunni. It's Sufist based. It's not the wild-eyed radicalism of the Wahhabists or the or Salafists. It's a religion that if you piss off the Chechens, the tribal instinct will kick over, and religion plays a role in unifying. But it's a religion, an approach that could lead to the kind of compromises that took place between Putin and Ahmad Kadyrov, the father of Ramzan, when they said, we can live in peace. Muslims and Christians, we can live in peace. And they are living in peace. Listen to Abdi Aladanov, the lieutenant general, Russian lieutenant general of Chechen origin, as he talks. He addressed United Russia. He's a Muslim, a devout Muslim. I've met the guy many times. He's a devout Muslim. And he is talking about the ability of Christians and Muslims to live together in peace and harmony and all that. That's what Russia wants. They don't want radical Islam to come into Syria and then gravitate to the south. And so they fought so hard to prevent that. And yet now we have a situation where that's what happened. Jolani is the most radical. He has a guy now that's come in as an advisor. And I've seen 2 videos that just, he has several people come in advisors. One guy is there with a young kid and he's telling them, okay, you're going to get in this car and you're going to drive and you're going to blow up these people. You're going to commit suicide. You're a suicide bomber and you're happy about it, aren't you? God is great, everything. Off and go. And that guy's now he's now the normalized people. No, Vladimir Putin, that guy wants to get young Chechens and young Dagestanis to go into cars and drive them in and kill Russian soldiers. That's what he wants to do. He needs to be killed, not coddled. The same thing, there's another guy, I just saw this video this morning. He has 2 daughters, a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and he's strapped explosives to them, his daughters. And he's telling them, and you can see the girl's face is like, I don't really want to do this. But he's like, no, you're a believer. You believe in God. You can do this. And sure enough, they walked in, remote detonated, boom, killed soldiers. He sacrificed his daughters. This is a sickness. This is an illness. This isn't religion. If you say this is religion, you're wrong. This has nothing to do with God. This has to do with the perversion of man. The fact that he is able to sacrifice his daughter, not in the name of Allah, not in the name of the Muslim faith, but in his own terroristic creed. He's a terrorist. And once a terrorist, always a terrorist, especially if you've gone down that route. And that's what HTS is. And Russia knows this. This is why I don't understand why Putin said it, because he knows the truth. He damn well knows the truth, and he knows what he's being briefed by his intelligence officers up until the fall of Assad, that what exists in Idlib is a cancer which, if not, excised and eliminated, can gravitate to the south. They've always been worried about that, always been worried about it. So I don't understand why he said what he said. I do think that he's in a difficult pickle about the future of these bases, and maybe he's trying to create the condition where Russia can maintain a military presence in Syria. For what purpose? I don't know. He talked about humanitarian goods, but no. Maybe he thinks that having that there, that he can somehow provide to monitor these people, and so he's playing a political game. But Putin doesn't normally say things that are just flat out wrong. And on this one, he's just flat out wrong. These aren't moderated terrorists. These are terrorists. These are the real deal. These are the most awful people on the planet. And as I said, you don't coddle them, you kill them. And the fact that the United States is going to meet with them is not an indication that they've been moderated. The United States has been backing them from day one, Vladimir. You know this. You know what the CIA did in Chechnya. You know what happened there, and you know what they're trying to do now. The United States has not backed away from its policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. And one of the key components of the strategic defeat of Russia is to create instability in the southern and northern Caucasus. And one of the best ways to do that is to inject radical Islam there. And now Syria will become the base from which the injection takes place. You know this, but he said what he said. So I just think it's one of the few outright errors that Vladimir Putin has made, but I call this an error, straight up error.
Yeah, it is curious because one of the thoughts as he was speaking that I had was, one, there's obviously some tongue-in-cheek here with the United States and normalizing these groups. It seemed like he was kind of indicating, then why would you talk to these groups if you find them to be terroristic elements? But also, then there's this question of, is Russia being strategic here, given the fact that these are the forces that are going to be, I guess if we could call it governing, attempting to govern, or the opposite of Syria for quite some time? Is Russia attempting to establish itself as a player here continuously so that it can wield whatever interests it has in this region, which, we can kind of see this with Afghanistan too. Afghanistan, the Taliban is the government in Afghanistan. It's not exactly the same thing, but it also is. You do have the entire collective West. They don't recognize the Taliban as the government there, but Russia is moving toward that. And I'm wondering if you believe, or if you would agree, or you could see Russia attempting to be strategic here, given that you said it is a difficult situation, and it is one that also makes you wonder about, how much does Russia exactly know? Because you said Russia knows who these forces are. Some people are asking, how much did Russia know leading into this fall of Syria?
I haven't put as much time into and that's a good question. It's a very good question on your part. Is this tongue in cheek? Am I taking him too literally? Is there another plane upon which I need to assess this? Because at the end of the day, as I've said, Russia doesn't care what you and I think. So it could be a game, and that Vladimir Putin may have said this as a game, and then down here he has two cards. Because let me just put it this way. I've spoken with several former Russian intelligence officers, senior level, who have operated in this area. And while they were very reticent and very careful not to give away, national secrets, the level of intimacy that they possessed regarding the societies and the countries that they were working in is amazing. They are more culturally capable of penetrating into the heart of a society than the United States is. Our case officers are too encumbered with being American. And anytime a case officer gets to that level where he can actually get in, he's accused of going native, and then they pull him back. The Russians, on the other hand, I think encouraged people to go native and get this. And the reason why I bring this up is Idlib was thoroughly penetrated by the Russians. It was a threat. It's a strategic threat to Russia. This terrorist outline that has Chechens there. It has Turkmens, Uzbeks, Uyghurs, people from the Northern Caucasus, people that could infiltrate into the Northern Caucasus very easily. It is a huge, it's a dagger pointing right at Russia. And Russia doesn't let that dagger exist without getting in there. And so I have nothing but the extreme confidence that Russia had thoroughly infiltrated Idlib to the extent possible. And so I don't think Russia was ignorant of what was strategically happening. They understood the intent. It's possible that Russia didn't have the tactical tip-off, although I think Russia probably would have had the tactical tip-off if they're that thoroughly infiltrated. And also, it's not just how Russia knew what was going on with HTS, but also with Turkey. Russia's right on the Turkish border. Russia, if I know the Russians, like I think I know the Russians, they have infiltrated Turkish government with their own spies. They have spies inside MIT, the Turkish intelligence service. It's just what you do. The Russians aren't amateurs. They've been doing this a long time. And I think they know full well what Erdogan's policies are and things of that nature. And the same thing with Syria. You have these Russian officers who are military professionals, and they have military intelligence guys who are very capable, and they're in Syria. They're meeting with their Syrian counterparts. It's not as though they're just sitting there not having, they've been there for a long time. These are guys that you're frontline warriors with. You're in the trenches with. You develop an intimacy with. You meet their families, and conversations occur where they talk about the problems that are taking place in Syria, etc. Russia tried to act on this in 2018, I believe, but they were rebuffed by Assad. But I think Russia knew damn well what was going on in Syria in terms of the corruption and the lack of intent to resist. Maybe they didn't, predict the absolute collapse of the Syrian military, but I'm pretty sure that the Russians were able to report back saying that, look, the Syrians right now aren't ready to repeat the kind of intense fighting that took place from 2015 to 2018. They're just not in a position. They're not psychologically ready. Their soldiers aren't ready. Their generals are too busy, stuffing their pockets with money. They're not there yet. So they'll need stiffening. And if you take a look at the number of bombs that Russia dropped early on in this, Russia had a stockpile of munitions that indicate that they had contingencies for something like this. Look at the Iranians, how quickly you don't mobilize people on short notice and get them moving towards unless you had a contingency plan in place. And I think the Iranians were the same. They're very good. I don't have the same level of, connectivity with the Iranian intelligence that I have with some of the retired people, but I respect the Iranians enough to believe that they're very, very good. They know the region. They've been there forever. They have the same number of contacts, the same kind of contacts, and that they knew what needed to be done. The Iranians always said, we need to stiffen up the Syrian army because they're not ready to fight. That's how the Syrian army didn't win the war from 2015 to 2018. They participated in a fight that was led by Russian air power and Iranian proxies who did the bulk of the hard fighting. Down in Dar, where they were cleaning up pockets, maybe the Tiger division took the lead. But when it came to the hard fighting in Aleppo, it was the Iranians that won that war, and with Russian air support backed up by the Syrians. But the idea that Syria was the main player, no, the Iranians, Hezbollah lost a lot of guys fighting to hold back the forces of Sunni Islamic extremism. So the Iranians knew exactly what needed to be done too, and that's why they were prepared to do it. But Assad not only pushed back prior to that, but what I think everybody was shocked by the rapidity of the collapse. I think the fact that the Syrians were ready to fight, because I think they said, okay, we're going to withdraw out of Aleppo and create a new line around Hama. And that's where the Iranians were willing to bring in tens of thousands of Iranian or Iraqi proxies, and the Russians had that air power just blowing the crap out of Idlib and the logistics sustainability, bring in that line and then push back. I think that was the goal and the objective. At least militarily, that's what the Russians and the Iranians were prepared to do. And you're not prepared to do that and take action on that if you actually believe that Syria is going to collapse. But what happened is they started to make that move, and Syria is just collapsing. Both the Russians and the Iranians went, there's no reason for us to continue doing this, because there's nothing to fight for. Why are we dropping bombs right now? It's not in support of anything on the ground, because the Syrians aren't on the ground. They're not fighting. They refuse to fight. They're withdrawing. And the Iranians stopped tens of thousands of Iraqi proxies at the border and said, we're not sending them in because they're supposed to come in and join into a joint operational command with the Russians and the Syrians, and there's no Syrians there. And so they stopped it. And then they both sat back and watched as this happened, and they yielded to Turkey. But I think if you take a look at Turkey's participation in the 3 Astana-style meetings that took place in Qatar, the first 2, they were working with the Russians and the Iranians to come up with some sort of interim deal. But in the end, the Russians and the Iranians went, we don't know what's going on. We have no influence over this. And they turned to Turkey and said, these are your boys. You got this. And so they stepped back, and Turkey came in, and Turkey's still trying to, get control over this situation. The Israelis took advantage of that vacuum, and they're up there pushing aggressively in Dara and the Golan, etc., very aggressively, too aggressively. The Turks are even starting to caution them off on that. But Turkey now is they have a Kurdish problem, so they're getting ready to send in Turkish army into Kobani and push the Kurds out and start the slaughter of the Kurds all over again. You have Erdogan stepping in again. There's no pushback. There's no Russians sitting there going, "Don't overstep, Turkey." Russia's going, we lost it. It's out of our control. Russia was in Syria with a very limited mandate. They were there at the invitation of the Assad government to push back against the terrorists. That's gone. Syria's gone. Assad's gone. There is no mandate for the Russians right now. And so everybody's saying, why don't the Russians do? There's no mandate for the Russians right now. And they're in a very vulnerable position. Look at a map. Tell me how Russia resupplies these people. You have thousands of Russian soldiers right now who are in a very, very vulnerable position. And either you redefine the political framework that allows these Russian soldiers to continue there, or you get them the hell out of Dodge. But you don't have a couple thousand Russians sitting there in Syria waiting to get their heads cut off if things go bad. The Iranians, they're all out of Syria. I mean, this is a big deal. There's a shrine. I can't remember the name of the shrine outside of Damascus, but it's being literally defaced and by these Sunni terrorists. This is a shrine. It's to a daughter of somebody, I guess. But this was a big deal. The Iranians, when the Revolutionary Guard first came into Syria, they came in to secure that shrine. That's how big this is, and they lost this shrine, and it's being defaced. By these Sunni terrorists. But the Iranians are gone. They're all out. Putin talked about airlifting 4,000 Iranians out. I think there's some Iranians are pushing back saying, well, we sort of did it without Russian help. But it doesn't matter. 4,000 Iranians fled. They're gone. And when they fled, they left a lot of stuff there. Iran was building an air defense system that Russia wouldn't build, but Russia was putting restrictions on what the Iranians could do, part of the effort of not irritating Israel and creating the conflict that's happening right now. All the things Russia. Syria is a huge failure for Russia, because all the things that Russia was trying to prevent has happened. The terrorists have taken control, and Israel's bombing the crap out of everything, and the Russians are there helpless. And so Putin, has to spin this. And I just think. Maybe again, I got to relook at this tongue-in-cheek thing. I'm not very much of a tongue-in-cheek kind of person when it comes to, this kind of stuff. But that could be. Maybe I'm reading him too literally. But the bottom line is, this is a huge defeat for Russia. Not strategic end of the world defeat, but the Syrian project has gone the exact opposite of the direction that Russia wanted it to go. And I don't understand why Putin is, unless it's tongue-in-cheek. While he's trying to, clean up these terrorists. These are the exact people he doesn't want coming into the Southern Caucasus. And now they've won. What do you think's going to happen to all the head choppers in Idlib? So they're not going to get absorbed into Syria. They're going to go back to Idlib, and they're going to be looking for other work to do. Because the thing about Islamic, Wahhabist, Salafist fanatics is they don't know how to retire and live in peace. It's not in their DNA. They're going to spend their entire life, especially if they've just succeeded in raising the black flag of Islam over Damascus. They're going to think they can do it again and again and again. If I were the Iraqis, I'd be very worried. And if I lived in the southern and northern Caucasus, I'd be very worried. This cancer is spreading, and right now nobody has a plan on how to stop it.
Yeah, we're going to have to see how this all transpires. Scott, I had one last thing I wanted to address before we head out of here, and that is, you mentioned earlier, so Antony Blinken was talking to the Council on Foreign Relations recently, and he made mention that the United States, this was very tongue-in-cheek, there was a lot of laughter about it, has not been very successful over the last 20 years trying to conduct regime change against Iran. Now, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of debate about the state of the axis of resistance as a whole, about whether this fall of Syria will lead to this road toward Tehran for the agents of regime change in the United States and elsewhere. And also, there's a lot of questions about the entire axis of resistance after the fall of Syria, with some interesting developments. For example, I know you've talked a lot about Ansar Allah, the Houthis, Yemen, standing very firm and tall. They didn't seem to get the memo that the axis of resistance is in tatters when they launched a few ballistic missiles into Tel Aviv recently. So I'm curious on what you think of these developments in lieu of the overall state of the axis of resistance in West Asia.
Well, let's back up a little bit. In 2003, when the United States invaded and occupied Iraq, the Iranians were very concerned that the United States intended to play upon this momentum and carry on the regime change, efforts into Iran. And Iran redid its entire security posture. They broke up the nation into several different military districts, each of which was capable of operating autonomously, meaning that if the United States was successful in carrying out a decapitation strike against the government of Iran, these independent areas would continue to resist, and they had their own strategic strike capability in terms of ballistic missiles. They had gone underground. They were designed to survive an occupation and resist an occupation and all that. So and the government of Iran looked at resiliency, continuation of government. They built underground facilities not only in Tehran, but I believe in Mashhad as well. And so what I'm trying to point out is Iran was ready for the worst, this physical invasion in an effort to occupy Iran. And all that preparation is in existence today. And so the collapse of Iran's position in Syria, while worrisome, doesn't take Iran to the point where they're vulnerable. They've already created Fortress Iran. And for those who say, yes, but there was Fortress Syria and it fell overnight. Couldn't that happen? Iran was stress test in 2023. I was at a meeting with Raisi where I asked him specific questions about this, and he spent a lot of time talking about what had happened. If you remember the Kurdish girl that was arrested because of a hijab violation, she died in police custody, and that triggered demonstrations throughout. Those demonstrations were then exploited by the various anti-regime elements that are supported by foreign entities: the Kurds, the Azeris, the Awaz Arabs, the Baluch, the MEK, and the monarchists all rose up in a concerted effort to bring down the Iranian government. Raisi said it was one of the most dangerous moments in the history of the Islamic Republic, that they were under attack everywhere, that this wasn't the way the Western media portrayed it. This was a concerted effort to overthrow the government. It was a life and death struggle, and it was very hard, but the Iranians won, and they won because of the support of the people. So the idea that the people today are ready to flip the script and just allow the Islamic Republic to collapse is absurd. I think the Islamic Republic is resilient. It has the support of the people, and that's a reality. So the idea that Iran's ready to go the way of Syria, I think, is wrong. And again, if you'd asked me if Syria was going to collapse in 8 days back in September, I said, no way it's going to happen. So who the hell knows? But right now, I'm painting Iran as resilient, etc. The question, therefore, isn't about the collapse of Iran. I don't think Iran's on the verge of collapse. I think, though, that Iran has to take a look at a axis of resistance posture that has been significantly degraded by the fall of Israel. Hezbollah has always been the big dog in the axis of resistance, especially as it pertains to Israel. Hezbollah was this loaded pistol pointed at the head of Israel. And if Israel ever was going to make an effort to attack Iran, to strategically defeat Iran, they always had to worry about this pistol going off and blowing their brains out. And that pistol was loaded with capabilities that were brought from Iran through Syria into Lebanon. That through Syria part is so important. Hezbollah doesn't exist the way it exists today without Syria. That's just a statement of fact. Couldn't have happened. Did you see that that video of the arms depot blowing up in outside of the Russian port of Taurus? Everybody's saying, "Oh, it's a nuclear weapon."
Yeah.
No, it's
yeah,
basically what happens when a whole bunch of high explosives detonates at the same time. You got this gigantic thing. That was a Hezbollah arms depot. That was one of the many depots that existed inside Syria that that Iran had been supplying with weapons that are meant to go to Hezbollah, and the Israelis blew it up. That's problematic for Hezbollah's ability to continue to fight, because while Hezbollah may have retained sufficient military capacity to respond for a short duration in intense conflict with Israel, the ability to continue that is problematic. And a lot of the ammunition that they would need to do that are located in these ammunition dumps on the periphery of the Syrian Lebanese border, and they've been blown up. The Israelis blew them up. They're gone. They can't be replenished because Iran can't drive the trucks from Al Qaim over to Abu Kamal, then across to Hama, Homs, and where they need to go. They don't own that land. It's been cut off. They can't fly in. The Israelis will shoot down the airplanes. They can't come in from the sea in meaningful fashion because they used to be able to disembark in Syrian ports. Not anymore. They don't own those ports. And they're not going to land in Lebanese ports. So how's this going to happen? I hear the Iranians say, we have a plan B, we have this. No plan B matches plan A. All right. Whatever their plan B is, it's going to be significantly reduced from what they were doing by using the Syrian land bridge. And the loss of the Syrian land bridge creates big problems for Hezbollah, because now it's no longer that loaded pistol. First of all, the loaded pistol existed in October of 2023. There were a lot of people at that time that said that Hezbollah needs to fire the gun now, and Iran needs to come in hard. Now's the time. But Israel wasn't strategically defeated in October of 2023. They had been embarrassed by Hamas on the border, but they weren't strategically defeated. And that was problematic. Also, understand that Hassan Nasrallah and Raisi, the president, understood, even though they weren't coordinated with, they understood what Sinwar and Hamas was trying to accomplish. And that was to create a situation that would strategically defeat Israel and allow for the creation of a Palestinian state. In order for that to happen, you have to keep all focus on Gaza. Everything has to be about Gaza, about the resistance, about Israel's crimes. And it can't be about anything else, like, for instance, a major war between Israel and Hezbollah. So for Hezbollah to support Hamas, they had to do managed escalation. They had to initiate a conflict of attrition. It begins with a handful of missiles being fired. The Israelis respond. Then you take it up a little bit more. But the idea is you never jump to full-scale war, because once you jump to full-scale war, the attention moves from Gaza to the Israeli-Lebanese conflict, which has the potential to bring in Iran. And now you're talking about global energy security, and nobody will be talking about Gaza and the crimes committed by Israel. And if you want proof of this, look what's happening today. All the headlines are on Syria. All the headlines are on anything but Gaza. Israel is continuing to slaughter children, women, innocents in refugee camps, in tents, dropping 2,000-pound bombs on them. It's a crime beyond belief, and nobody's talking about it now, because what Hassan Nasrallah feared could happen has happened. But Hezbollah today, back then they had a plan. It was a plan based upon, a very immediate, violent conflict that would have Hezbollah rockets raining down on Israeli airfields and command and control centers, while Hezbollah shock troops went through tunnels, popped up in Israeli villages, captured those villages, forcing Israel to fight on Israeli soil instead of taking the fight into Lebanon, and then pushing in to try and secure northern Galilee. That was the Hezbollah plan. We know that because Israel, as they moved into southern Lebanon, they found the tunnels, found the equipment, found all this. Hezbollah was never supposed to fight a long, drawn-out war of attrition with Israel. Hassan Nasrallah made a decision on October 9th when he started this process that he was not, that the loaded pistol that he had been preparing for 18 years to use was not going to be used, because as you engage in this war of attrition, that capability also degrades over time. So Hezbollah had to change into an entity that's capable of long-term resistance, managed escalation, not a short, sharp conflict with Israel. But that requires sustainability, which requires Syria to serve as the land bridge for Iran. That's gone. So everybody's like, well, Hezbollah still can threaten it. No, that capability's gone. They have limited capacity right now. And so now Hezbollah, one of the reasons why they agreed to the ceasefire is that the Lebanese government was telling them it's time. You did what you did. You fought the good fight. But now it's turned into an Israel-Lebanon conflict, and the Lebanese people are paying the price, and we can't do this anymore. You're a member of this government. You have to stop this fighting. And that's why Hezbollah agreed to the ceasefire. But they always believed that Israel would violate the ceasefire and they'd be able to resume their operations. But in order for that to happen, you have to have the connectivity with Iran through Syria. With that gone now, the Hezbollah resistance will weaken. And remember, the ceasefire is predicated on eventual implementation of Security Council resolutions that call for the militia of Hezbollah to be turned over to the control of the Lebanese armed forces. And I think that's your trajectory we're on. It's not going to happen overnight, but eventually, if you can't be resupplied, you can't engage in meaningful pushback against Israel. And eventually, there will be some sort of compromise deal that the Lebanese armed forces assumes a certain amount of responsibility for the Hezbollah militias. I mean, Lebanon has no choice now. The West is, without the land bridge, without connectivity, Lebanon is literally lying prostrate before the West, and they will have to do what the West asks them to do. And the other thing is that Hezbollah now will have to become just a political party. And without the resistance factor, Hezbollah now has competition with other Shia, the Amal party, would weaken its resolve. So I think Hezbollah is not going to disappear, but I think you're going to see a diminishment of Hezbollah's, the role that Hezbollah played over time, which weakens the axis of resistance, because now the axis of resistance is going to have a weakened Hezbollah, a Syria that no longer exists. Nasrallah, of course, down there taking steroids and spitting. God bless these people. I mean, I don't mean to laugh because there's a lot of suffering that's going to take place, but they don't back down from anybody. I mean, I have a little dog, a wonderful little Pomeranian that we just got, Iceman. But when Iceman decides, screw you, it's screw you. It doesn't matter. I mean, he's just going to sit there and look and go, no, I'm not doing what you asked me to do. It's not going to happen. And I'm not comparing Nasrallah to little Pomeranians. I'm just saying that Nasrallah is like, screw you. No, fire. We're committed to this cause. So that's the bright spot in the. But look at Iraq, the Iraqi militias, the pro-Iranian Iraqi militias. Iraq now is being placed under a lot of pressure by the United States to bring these militias under control. So there's a lot of change taking place. Look at Iran. They have a president right now who's not on board with this axis of resistance, chest beating stuff. He gave a public presentation in Iran where he said, I didn't want Operation True Promise 2, the 200 missiles that came in and humiliated Israel. I didn't want that. We were in negotiation with the European Union about lifting sanctions. Then this happened, and now we're not having those negotiations anymore. He doesn't want True Promise 3. He doesn't want True Promise 4. He doesn't want True Promise anything. And now that the IRGC has been weakened because of the collapse of Syria, because of the diminishment of Hezbollah, he has the ability to at least weigh in internally and say, we need to find a way to mollify the West. And I did reach out to somebody and asked about the his ability to negotiate away the nuclear program, and my response was he doesn't have that ability, but Iran is in uncertain times right now. Trump's coming in, and Trump definitely wants to negotiate away that stuff, and Trump is sensing weakness again, as evidenced by Keith Kellogg. Not all of his advisors are the smartest people in the world about the problems that Trump is going to be confronting, but Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal negotiated by Obama in 2015, pulled out in 2018, saying that it was a bad deal, that he wanted a better deal. And notice that that's important. He wanted a better deal. He didn't want to remove the Iranian regime. He wanted a better deal. And is there a better deal to be had out there? Let's find out. But this is the situation that the axis of resistance is in right now. A very, they've been upended. What they thought was, a solid wall that connect Hezbollah through Syria, Iraq, Iran, down to Yemen, is now Hezbollah is diminished. Syria is gone. Iraq is under attack, and only Ansarallah is coming forward big. Iran is hesitant. So we're in uncertain times right now. The axis of resistance isn't what it used to be.
Yeah, there certainly is a diminishment, as you said. It'll be interesting to see how things develop because the situation in Syria, all of these, and all of the developments that you've just been talking about that link to it are so much in flux. It'll be interesting to see how Hezbollah, how Iran, Ansarallah, I think we can kind of predict where they are going to be for the time being. And even the Palestinian resistance, which will be diminished in terms of their support. But at the same time, it seems like what we're going to see is a whole lot of chaos, but still, while diminishment with Hezbollah, we're still going to see fighting. There's probably going to be a lot of chaos, it seems, Israel, Turkey, these invading forces, and as well as these armed groups that now are trying to run the country or will be destabilizing the country, I should say, of Syria, fighting amongst each other. It will be a very uncertain time indeed. Scott, I did have a couple of questions from the audience. I did want to say something, though, about Syria, because you mentioned earlier, and maybe we can close on this, and I'll pull up a few questions you can answer in the non-loquacious manner. But one thing about Syria, you mentioned about those who were talking to you about, well, sometimes people need help to free themselves. I think they were talking about probably the Syrian government, correct? That they needed to free themselves from the Assad regime, so they need outside help. That's the argument they were making.
Well, they're making their argument was to free themselves from Assad.
Right.
That they needed the CIA's help to do that, but that doesn't make them tools of the CIA.
Yeah. Right. And well, I remember, Syria was particularly painful for me because when I was young and up and coming, trying to figure out what the hell U.S. interventionism and empire was really all about, Syria was a big part of that process for me. And I worked with a group called the Syrian American Forum, Syrians in the United States, living in the United States, who had essentially moved because of the now what was eventually going to be a several years now 13 plus year war, which people seem to forget that caused a lot of damage to Syria, but and then led to starvation sanctions, which hollowed out the government. But they were very afraid of this very scenario occurring and were very critical of all of the foreign support that these groups that were literally infiltrating the country, invading the country, were receiving. So, for me, this is painful because I see these old arguments against that. I see these old arguments be rehashed that, sometimes the West, we need the support from the West to free ourselves from, autocratic rule and dictators and all of this. But the fact of the matter is that whatever flaws the Syrian government had, it represented something that was just immensely important for the region, not just secularism, not just a cog as the axis of resistance, but also as a stable force of independence and sovereignty from the very forces that a lot of people that make this argument are saying are helping them, like the West, the invader, like literally the people who drew the map, who invaded and try to colonize and try to destroy places like Syria. For me, that's just one of the most painful parts about this, is that we've had a definite defeat in that regard, which does set things back. But I'll let you react to that as quickly as you want, and I'll pull up a question or two.
Well, I'll just say this: it's can anybody provide me an example of where the United States has intervened militarily, whether to help people or not, and it hasn't resulted in total chaos and disaster for the people we were supposed to help?
Right.
South Vietnam, South Korea. I mean, I guess you could say South Korea, but is it really?
I mean, look what's happening in South Korea. Yeah.
The Kurds, Iraq. No, we touch it, it dies. I wrote an article about this, about the Midas touch. America likes to run around thinking that everything we touch turns to gold. But you do know that the Midas touch was a curse, right? I mean, when you turn to gold, what happens? You die. And so everything we touch dies. And that's the reality. And I'm telling you right now, Syria is going to die. And I again, I mean, I guess as a humanitarian, I care. But if people think that I have a vested interest, I don't have investments in Syria. I don't have a vested interest. I could easily I could carve Syria out of my life today and never talk about it again. And nothing meaningful is going to change. Syria means nothing to me in terms of my existential existence. I only care about it because I'm an analyst who looks at things like that. But, you are foolish to believe that the United States will help you and that you'll come out of this better. The United States is incapable of helping you because the United States doesn't want to help you. The United States only helps itself. It will sacrifice you, and it always sacrifices you. Ask the Ukrainian people. This is about trillions of dollars of mineral reserves under the soil, not about democracy. And we are willing to kill every single one of you stupid son of a bitches because you were too dumb to believe that we were there to help you. And for all the stupid Syrian people out there, and I don't mean to be too blunt, but I'm going to be blunt. All the stupid Syrian people out there who believed that the United States was going to help you, your ignorance has condemned your nation because your nation is dead. It doesn't exist anymore. Whatever is going to come out of this ain't going to be Syria. Whatever you thought Syria was ain't going to exist. And just get used to it. But you were too dumb to believe that the United States was going to help you. We don't help. We kill. We destroy for our benefit. And you were silly and stupid and ignorant to believe that it would be otherwise. There. Now I've pissed off everybody, but I don't care.
Well, for me, who's been involved in various peace activities, anti-war activities for so long, it's one of the most frustrating things to see is when you have certain forces, because let's be honest, one of the most tragic things about this is that the multiplicity of voices, if we are going to use that very verbose framing of Syrian people, are not the ones that we hear from. We hear from a very distinct, usually pro-American, pro-regime change. They get the narrative, they get the cameras, they get the media attention. That's who we get to hear from. We don't get to hear from the people who, regardless of how it was done, but we have to remember back in 2014, Bashar al-Assad was supported by 80% of people who voted, regardless of whether you think that's legitimate or not. To believe that that's completely discredits the Syrian people as a very diverse people who have opinions, probably many of them antithetical to what's going on in Syria right now, would be, I think, just completely absurd, and just shows just a deep ignorance and as you said, it's stupidity. It's stupidity, but it's stupidity for the empire.
Let's again, lest I be accused of insulting everybody, because not my objective. Just those who believe the United States is a force of good and can help you. We're not. We could be, We could be, but we're not. Not the rules-based international order ensures that we will never be a force of stability, because the rules-based international order only exists to enrich us, to empower us. We don't share power. We don't share wealth. We strip it from you and we bring it to us. That's it. Prove me wrong. You can't. But I will say this. Let's call Syria a tent. And inside the tent are a number of families who are talking about the future, etc. And the camel sticks his nose under the tent. Now, the smart thing to do is beat the crap out of that nose and get the camel to remove it. But there might be some who says, oh, the camel's cold, we need to bring him in. Now, 90% can say, nope, ain't going to happen. We don't want that to happen. They let the nose come in, the head comes in, the body comes in, the camel's in the tent, and we're screwed. But the people that believe that the camel should be brought in, it's a force of good, let it happen. It's possible that the number of people that were vocally supportive of America's role is a minority of people. We don't know. I haven't put a number on that yet. Right. But the point is, you let the damn camel in the tent. Right. You let America in, and that's it. It ruins cohesion. That there will not be a family gathering because the frickin' camel's in the tent. He's going to shit on your food. He's going to piss on your fire, and he's going to stink up the entire tent. America's the goddamn camel. Keep us out of the tent. Don't invite us in. But you did. And now we've ruined it. And it's ruined. It's over. You're not getting it back. Sorry. It's just never works out that way, guys. It never works out that way. Once you give it away to us, we don't return it to you. We break it. That's it.
Right. For those of us who want to see peace, sovereignty, justice, no nuclear war, no war at all, the simple principle of let people inside of their countries, who live in their countries, determine their own fate often gets lost in moments like these where we just constantly hear of, well, which side, which force, which outside force, which country that has some vested interest in a place like Syria, what can they do? And that's what we have been hearing for so long with Syria. And it's just, of course, with Syria's fall, it's come up to such a tense degree. But I'm just going to pull up one question, guys. Sorry. I'm going to pull up the super chats as Scott answers them because we are running a bit late. So I'm just going to ask you this from Dan. He said, question for Scott. You recently said if Iran doesn't give up nuclear sites, U.S. would nuke Iran. Is that far-fetched considering ramifications?
Dan, I'd ask you to go back and re-examine what I said. Let me be very specific about what I said. I said that Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA. Can we agree on that? I just want to start with points of agreement. Now, I know you I can't see you nodding your head yes, but I'm going to assume that you're nodding your head yes. Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA. All right. Donald Trump said that JCPOA is a bad deal because it led down a path where it would eventually, because of the expiration of the sunset clauses, acquire capabilities such as enrichment that could be used to make a nuclear weapon. Even if Iran didn't want a nuclear weapon, the capabilities would be there. Can we nod our head yes on that? Please tell me you're nodding your head yes, because it's a statement of fact. He's also said that he will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon at all. Zero tolerance for it. And can we, is your head nodding? I'm assuming it is. I'm being a dick right now because I'm not picking on this guy, but I don't simply say stupid little short sentences. Danny rightfully mocked me for my loquacious answers, but one of the reasons why I do the loquacious answers is because these problems are very complex. And there's a lot of facets and nuances in there that I barely touch upon when I answer these questions. But I'm familiar with the vast majority because I actually spend my entire frickin' life studying this stuff, especially issues like nuclear weapons and Iran's nuclear program. So now Trump says you'll never happen, but Trump's not the kind of guy just to say something. He turned around and two things. He had a nuclear posture review where he continued the policy of saying that America will use nuclear weapons preemptively when required, meaning we're not going to wait for someone to nuke us. If we see a problem out there, bam, preemptive. That's his guidance. He's the president of the United States back then. He says, prepare for preemptive strike. And then he turns around and gets an employment plan. That means how we're going to use the weapons that is focused almost singularly on the issue of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. I'm not making this up. The nuclear employment plan talked about B-61 bombs, the gravity bombs delivered by B-2 bombers, and W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapons to come in to penetrate the underground sites to take out Iran's nuclear capability if Iran decided it was going to move down the path towards nuclear weapons. Now, Donald Trump left, Joe Biden came in. The deteriorating situation that's taken place over the region has put Iran on the cusp of being a nuclear power. Not me saying it, everybody's in agreement that Iran, instead of being a year away from breakout, is days away. That is, that the political decision is made in Iran to produce nuclear weapons. They can do so very fast. Nod your head yes, Dan, if you're with me. You with me? I think you are. You are now. Are you woken up the fact that Donald Trump actually had a plan to go to nuclear war with Iran when he was the president, and the situations that would have triggered that plan exist right now? Are you with me, Dan? Because if you're not, get the hell out of here. It's Danny's chat, so I can't control it. But come on, don't be stupid here. Don't be playing stupid games. Donald Trump has said he will not tolerate a nuclear Iran at all. He built a nuclear plan back when he was president before to prevent this from happening. The situation today is far different than it was when he was president before. Iran is on the cusp, but not me saying it. Several senior advisors to the supreme leader have said all we need is the political change. And they've also said that the fatwa can be reversed. Are you with me, Dan? The fatwa that says Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons can be reversed because of the changing environment, which is happening as we speak. So if the supreme leader says yes to a nuclear bomb, Iran will have one within a week. Donald Trump has said if that happens, he will blow them off the frickin' earth using nuclear weapons. A little bit of nuance there, right? So it's not as simple as you said. Am I overstating it? Hell no. I'm giving you the uncomfortable facts. Everything I just said is factual. Factual. Now, Donald Trump is looking for a better deal. But I think he'll probably do to Iran what he did with North Korea, where he started off with his fire and fury speech at the Security Council, if you remember that one. I will bring fire and fury down on you like you have never seen before, meaning nuclear weapons. And he turned around and said, but we can talk. So I have a feeling that Trump's going to come in a little bit fire and fury, saying, I got a nuclear war plan. I will take you out in a heartbeat. I won't even blink on this one. I won't even blink. It'll be done. But would you like to talk to me? And I hope that the Iranians say, yes, we'd like to talk, because at this point in time, whatever they thought they were going to accomplish with a nuclear weapon isn't going to be accomplished. And if everybody's like, well, go ahead and do it, and you'll be like North Korea. No. See, North Korea always had nuclear weapons. They just were looking to make them strategic. So North Korea always had the ability to threaten Seoul and Tokyo and all that. The moment the Iranians say we have nuclear weapons is the moment Iran disappears as a modern nation state, because Russia will, dog's going crazy. Russia will, United States will nuke it. And there people say, well, Russia will put Iran under its nuclear umbrella. No, they won't. Russia's not going to commit national suicide for Iran. So this is a very dangerous situation. Donald Trump is a very dangerous president in this regard. But this is real. I'm not making shit up. I'm not throwing facts out. I'm not, trying to say something. I'm just giving you the hard truth. If you can't handle the truth, go watch Jack Nicholson movie or something. But
I have to, Scott, just give Sparky, who asked about a half dozen questions, for you to quickly comment on this one, since he's been so generous. Should Iran do the missile thing now to Israel, or wait their fate, because Iran is on the infamous list? This is more of your opinion, because earlier you addressed this question on the basis of the situation that we find ourselves in real terms. But if, in your opinion, what do you think about this question?
No, look. To what end? To what end? To feel good? To make us feel good? All the people that don't like Israel out there, who view Israel as a genocidal Zionist, crazy, maniacal thing, we'd feel good for a moment. We'd cheer. We'd go, oh my God, look. But the big dog is coming into the neighborhood. Okay, the United States is not going to be ruled by a senile old man anymore, and we're not going to be ruled by a cackling hyena DEI candidate who the Democrats put out there. We're going to be ruled by a crazy white guy who is willing to go to extremes to do what he wants. Iran will not defeat Israel with a single strike or multiple. And if they do, Iran will be inviting decapitation as soon as Trump becomes president. If I'm the Iranian president, I've been, if I'm the supreme leader, The principal goal over the course of the last 30 years has not been the defeat of Israel. Yes, Iran is there with the axis of resistance to support Palestinian cause, but the principal goal has been to lift sanctions and have normalized economic relations with the world so that Iran, this nation that has tremendous wealth, can have the citizens benefit from this wealth. Right now, the Iranian citizens, it's a tough life. Sanctions have hurt hard. They should be living a better lifestyle than they are right now. And so the goal of the Iranian nation isn't existential struggle with Israel. It's to have a revived economy. And if I were the Iranian president, that would be the direction I'd be going. Whatever policies that could be implemented that lead to the normalization of relations. What leader wants his nation to exist under sanctions and the people suffering? No sane leader wants that. And no nation wants a leader who says that's what we're going to get. The Iranian government survives in the face of sanctions because it can easily be laid on the porch of, the people who impose them. It's their fault, not our fault. We didn't withdraw from the JCPOA. Trump did. The European Union failed to comply with all this kind of stuff. But if you turn around and say, screw it, hit Israel with everything we got right now. Why? Why? And the consequences will be devastating for Iran. So if I were the Iranian leadership, I would say, hell no, let's find a negotiated path. You always have those missiles in reserve. You can always bring them out if need be, but you need to exhaust every venue possible short of war before you go to war. And right now, negotiations with the United States appears to be on the table. I've consistently called myself, anti-war. I've also been called a militarist son of a bitch by many people. Look, I don't shy from a fight, and if you want to have an existential fight, let's have an existential fight, and I will fight to win. I don't make any apologies about that. If you want a war with America, you're going to lose because we're going to beat you, because we're not going to just roll over and play dead. But I don't want that kind of war. I've always said we have to exhaust every venue possible short of war before we go to war so that we honor the sacrifice we're asking people to make in support of this cause. It has to be a cause worthy of that death. And you have to make sure that there's other ways besides violence to achieve what you want to achieve. It would sort of be a double standard of me now if I didn't apply that same logic to Iran. For people saying, well, no, we need True Promise 3. Hit them. No. If you believe in avoiding wars, then you have to believe in avoiding wars, even if the target is a genocidal, maniacal regime called Israel. I don't think that Iran benefits from launching a major missile attack against Israel at this point in time. I think it would be to the detriment of Iran and therefore irresponsible policy on the part of the Iranian leadership. There is a path to peace that could be found. Doesn't mean it will be found. Doesn't mean at some point in the future Iran will have no choice. But there's a path to peace that could be found, and I think it's worth giving that a chance.
Yeah, I think it would be, and I think this is the approach of the entire multipolar world, really. Iran, Russia, China. I think they take a very similar approach, which is they will exhaust, they will extend as much. I mean, with Russia, of course, because of the Ukraine conflict being so existential, being such a brazen violation, which is anything that could be called international law and a threat to Russia's sovereignty and existence, that puts Russia in a very unique situation. But all of them have a very similar approach, which is if there's any room to ensure stability, to prevent war with those who call them adversaries, the United States, the West, whoever it is, then it will be taken. Of course, Israel, because it has this completely unhinged, genocidal, and just absolutely antithetical posture toward Iran and the entire region, really. There's never any question about negotiations with Israel when it comes to Iran. But in terms of the entirety of the world situation, it would be ridiculous for a country sanctioned like Iran not to try to do that, even under these conditions. And I just look at Syria. I haven't been we can close here if you want to respond to this, Scott, but we can close there. My thing about Syria is that people have been really wanting I think to like blame who is to blame here, how did this happen. I've actually been, because I'm curious about what has really happened. I don't think we know so much. I think we have some of the facts you detailed out, Scott, but there's a lot left to know. And for me, I look at, for example, Syria's decisions over the last several years, which obviously had consequences now that the government of Bashar al-Assad and the Ba'ath Party is no more. I look at them almost as like, well, what do you do under the conditions in Syria are and were so horrific. I mean, over a decade of war and then multiple years of starvation, sanctions. Few countries in the world can say they have gone through that in their entire history, let alone right now. And I look at, for example, Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian government moving into the Arab League, all of these moves, which may have had dire consequences in the final analysis, as something that I don't see how there were any other options than to try to play all sides and get as much as you can from everyone, even if there's going to be consequences in doing that. Like in my not conspiratorial hat, but my thoughts about what might have happened internally in Syria is that, yeah, some of these compromises, this attempt to get closer to countries like Saudi, Qatar, all of these countries that were so invested in your downfall for so long, could very well have led to an internal situation, and especially in the military, that had became untenable and led to a huge vacuum. I don't know this for a fact, but I assume that could have played a role, given that I don't think any of these forces, especially in the United States, etc., were really stopping their regime change operation, even when the cauldron in Idlib and the cessation of hostilities and the Astana process. I don't think there was any. I don't believe that the empire really ever rests. So I believe there was probably some internal things going on, and here we are in this place. But I just want to say that in lieu of the fact that, yeah, Iran would be completely out of their minds to not just to be prepared for a Trump administration that may, in the end, be just even more hostile than the prior administration, but not to try to open up any channels for keeping that at bay would be, to me, ridiculous, especially given the sanctions are harming Iran right now. But if you want to close, Scott, with any final comments, then we can get out of here.
Well, I'll just leave it this. The CIA can never be trusted. And the CIA had a Syria operations group in place. It didn't go away, as you rightly pointed out. And a key aspect to the Syrian operations group was the interface between the CIA and the various Gulf Arab entities that were funding and supporting the efforts to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. If you don't dissolve the Syria operations group and the CIA relationships with these nations doesn't go away, then you can't trust the political interface between these nations and Syria. And Assad was naive to believe that these Arab governments were looking out for his benefit. If they have a relationship with the CIA, then one of my preconditions would have been, you need to publicly renounce everything you did with the CIA, and you have to stop all these things, demonstrate that that's happened, and then I can have a talk with you. Meanwhile, until that happens, the two things that kept me alive, Russia and Iran, they're here, and we're going to rely upon them. I'm not giving up the foundation of why I'm here, able to talk to you. The only reason why you're talking to me today is because Russia and Iran helped me survive that which you were trying to do to overthrow me. It was naive in the extreme on the part of Bashar al-Assad to believe in this, and I think it was reflective of the desperation of the situation that he found himself in. With a nation in turmoil, I think he was taking what he thought would be the path of least resistance, and he was wrong. And ultimately, we see the result of that. For Iran, understand this: there isn't an Iranian operations group. There's an Iranian mission center. Now, I think I read they may be in the process of dissolving that, but that means they go back to the Iranian operations group. The CIA is dedicated to the overthrow of the Iranian government. I'll say it one more time just so everybody understands. The CIA is dedicated to the overthrow of the Iranian government. That's all they exist to do when it comes to Iran. They're not there to facilitate trade or normalization relations. They're there to kill you, destroy your nation, break you down, make what happened in Syria happen in Iran. That's it. And as long as the CIA exists with its marching orders, that's what it's going to do. So you can't trust the United States as long as the CIA has that mission. So any negotiations that have to take place with Donald Trump have to bring up the fact that you've been trying to get rid of us. Tony Blinken just said that there's 20 years you were trying to get rid of Assad. Okay, before we move on, I need a statement from you that you no longer seek to overthrow. Now, Trump said that during the campaign. That's why I'm having this conversation with Round Down Danny, because normally I wouldn't speculate into things that seem fanciful. But Trump did say, I'm not seeking the overthrow of the Iranian regime. So become president again, and now make this policy. Come out and say, we are going to enter into good faith negotiations with the Russians. I am shutting down the CIA's Iran Mission Center. We are not seeking the overthrow of the Iranian government. Our priority from here on in is how can we work with Iran to achieve peace and stability in the region that's economically beneficial to all parties, blah, 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 blah. But until he addresses the issue of the CIA's mission of regime change, you can't be trusted at all. That's why the Russians, I can't imagine Putin meeting with Trump until Trump comes out and says, yeah, that whole strategic defeat thing that, that Biden was all about, that's not our policy anymore. That opens up every door. All potential happens. But the CIA is the most corrupt thing in the world today. It exists only to sow chaos and anarchy to the sole benefit of the United States and to the exclusion of everybody else. They're not a good organization. I'm not speaking about the intelligence analysts. They simply do intelligence. I'm talking about the operations, the clandestine division. It is a cancer to the world, and it must be ended now because it exists only to do one thing: overthrow your government. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Scott, we're going to head out here together. Thanks, everyone, for all the super chats. Thanks, everyone, for watching today for this pretty mega Friday stream. Go to the video description to find Scott Ritter's work, to find our first guest, Pepe Escobar's Telegram. You can find Scott Ritter's website in the video description, scottritter.com, and all the places to support this channel, Patreon, Substack, and so much more. Everybody, before you go, hit the like button if you haven't already. That keeps the stream boosted. Leave a comment if you can. That keeps the stream going so that others can see it after we depart here. But without further ado, everybody, take care. I will see you all next week, I think, for one final stream before the holiday. All right. Bye-bye.